Good morning. Senate Rehab and Social Services Subcommittee on Cannabis legislation will come to order. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Senator McDougall, Senator Reeves, Senator Survival,
Here.
Senator Sproul, Senator Boysko, Senator Kiggins,
Here.
Senator Pike,
Here.
McPike, excuse me. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate everyone joining us again today, both committee members, staff, as well as those joining us in the public online. A couple quick housekeeping items. Thank you for those who joined us yesterday. We had a very extensive public discussion, which was, I think, greatly appreciated. I think I speak for all the subcommittee members in terms of the public feedback, those who opposed or opposed with various specific comments, as well as those who support the legislation. And again, with the over 65 people we heard from yesterday, we spent a good amount of time identifying and taking several pages of notes based on the speakers, which is greatly appreciated. And for those who have joined, just as a note, we did conclude our public comment period yesterday as a part of the subcommittee's work. And again, as a reminder, if you were not able to join us yesterday, the committee is taking up relevant sections of the bill related to rehab and social services. So it is really the regulatory structure, the license fees, the tiers, the social equity components, the local authority, the local referendum framework, and then many of the enactment clauses in relation to the bill. Again, as a timeline, if the bill is to continue out of rehab and social services, it'll be re-referred to the Committee of Judiciary, and so that committee will be taking up all the expungement components and all the crime components that are listed in the bill. So if there are those viewing or watching that are interested in those items will be addressed again in Senate Judiciary. Furthermore, as the bill moves forward through Judiciary, it will be re-referred to Senate Finance and Appropriations. That is the appropriate committee to address tax rates as well as expenditures. And so if you are looking for information on that, those committees will be addressing those items. So this morning for committee members, I wanted to go through a couple different items of a little bit of recap of yesterday. It was the subcommittee's feel, starting out with the regulatory structure, that the committee began to really look towards an independent agency versus what was proposed in the bill, which was for those elements to fall under ABC. And I think we had some good, healthy discussion amongst both staff, the administration, and subcommittee members. And the subcommittee has come to the conclusion that moving forward with an independent agency to deal with it is the right solution. And I think the committee feels that ABC is doing a good job. I think credit to Travis Hill and his team of being innovative, especially during the COVID crisis. And so I just want to make sure to publicly thank Travis Hill and his team and to ensure, I think, on behalf of the subcommittee, that this decision is in no reflection whatsoever on ABC itself. This has been a dynamic year, and the ABC has stepped up. But I think both the public comment yesterday, as well as the subcommittee's discussion, has identified that this line of business is much different than the current work of ABC. Additionally, the social equity components that the administration has laid out lend itself to ensure that we have a regulatory team and structure that is focused on those components and that business model. And the business model is a significant enough departure to warrant an independent agency. And I wanted to take an opportunity to open up the discussion to subcommittee members on that topic as we sort of conclude that recommendation to the full committee, and I'll open it up to members.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Reeves. I would
Senator
echo,
Reeves.
Mr. Chairman, I would echo your comments of the amount of work that we did yesterday, and look forward to delving back into this even more today. And with regard to ABC and trying to set up the Cannabis Control Authority, or whatever we're going to call that next entity. One of the comments yesterday I thought was pretty beneficial is, we've just gotten to where we're still working the kinks out on medical marijuana, and those are coming through in that setup. And as that setup is processing, we're learning things that we didn't know, and what I'm finding out. So I know there was an urgency to get this thing done, but I think if we take the constructive approach that this committee, the subcommittee, is taking under your leadership as well, moving forward, it might seem like it's slowing it down, but I think making sure that we do it the right way is important. That'd be my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reeves. Other subcommittee member comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Boysko.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to echo Senator Reeves' comments. I think it's important that we get this right, that we make sure that we have the social equity piece in place properly, and we have the regulatory framework that's going to be successful. So I appreciate your leadership on this, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Boysko.
Mr. Chair.
Other thoughts from the subcommittee?
Mr. Chair, just to echo.
Senator
Thank
Higgins.
you. Mr. Chair, just to echo the words of my colleague, yeah, I agree with kind of the slowing the roll. And just of note, just in some reading, Colorado legalized medicinal marijuana in 2009, and then recreational marijuana in 2014. So that was a 5-year period kind of in between. And I do worry about the effect on the medicinal marijuana industry that we have worked so hard to get in place the right way. And I think there's an amendment talk about protections for those guys, because just from the healthcare background, I do appreciate the benefits of medicinal marijuana, but I want those guys to be successful. They're highly regulated. That they have a lot of just protections in place. I feel like they're doing a very good job, and I want them to succeed. And I want to see how that goes before we push this just legalization of all of recreational marijuana, and then that would definitely be a competition for those guys. I also worry about just the tourism aspect from my district, which is Virginia Beach. We would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the only beach kind of resort town on the East Coast to have legalized marijuana. Is that correct? So that's correct. So I just feel like that tourism component, and I know we've talked briefly about membership on the Cannabis Advisory Board, but I feel like having the tourism board have some say in this, just to make sure, we don't turn what is awesome about Virginia Beach, and I don't want it to be a pot tourism destination, and I do worry about that. Right now, it's a great place for families. It's one of our shining stars in Virginia, so I just want to make sure that we're aware of just the tourism, how the tourism industry will be affected with this, which will take time, again, slowing the roll of kind of what we're doing. So, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Higgins. Any further additional comment on the regulatory structure from the subcommittee? All right, hearing none, the next item that we had pending from yesterday was a discussion on definitions. If our attorney can help us draw back to the line so we could potentially get some administration support to go back through. And actually, I see Senator McDougall is not here, so I will defer that item.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Servo.
Sorry, one thing just occurred to me while I was thinking. I also just wanted to make sure with regard to this separate agency concept that Mr. May also understands that we think that it's appropriate that the legal authority for this be put in the same title of the code. We have substances like this all regulated in the same title. I think that's logically, it's one of the lawyers on the committee, I think where it ought to live. Okay.
Mr. Chair, Senator Serval, my plan is, and I've started drafting, is to split Title 4.1 into 2 subtitles rather than initially we were just adding on a new chapter. But seeing how we're now creating a new agency, I thought it'd be better to put everything that's currently in 4.1 related to alcohol in Subtitle 1, make a Subtitle 2 where we create our new agency, and then all the rules about cannabis to kind of make them equal.
Sounds like a good idea to me. Thank you.
My only question would be, and this is super substantive, but about the name of this new agency. I was deferring maybe the Virginia Cannabis Authority or Virginia Cannabis Control at the pleasure of the committee.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Eben.
Senator Reeves, I think, suggested Cannabis Control Authority, and I think Virginia Cannabis Control Authority would be a name for the committee to consider.
Thank you, Senator Eben. Hearing no objection, we can certainly start with that, and I'm sure if there are other suggestions or tweaks from either the administration or others, we can identify that as the bill goes through the process. So, actually, a question for Senator Servo. Do you want to go through the definitions? I know you and Senator McDougall had collaborated to some extent. Do you want to start through the process of the definitions first, or do you want to defer?
I think we need to wait for Senator McDougall to get here.
Okay. The next item that we had also pending through our discussion yesterday's was some of the definitions in relation to industrial hemp and some of the adjustments also to how the industrial hemp current cultivators would participate in this market. Senator Eben, do you have suggested items of discussion for the committee?
I had a number of potential amendments, just I think some of them are clarifying. One was to revise the definition of marijuana manufacturing facility, marijuana cultivation facility, marijuana wholesaler, because I'm told the way the hemp people operate is sometimes rather than purchase, they do some kind of profit-sharing arrangement. So I spoke with some folks, and where it says to purchase or take possession, where it says to purchase marijuana from a marijuana cultivation facility, to say, and council has this, I believe.
Yes, Senator Eben, can you direct the committee to the section of the bill or line number of the bill?
Yeah, lines 3048 to 3053, where the definition of marijuana manufacturing facility is, to add the words after authorize the licensee to purchase marijuana, to say to authorize the licensee to purchase in new language or take possession of retail marijuana would be one. Then on lines 3032 to 3037, where it says to purchase marijuana plants, to say purchase or take possession of marijuana plants. And then when you get to marijuana wholesaler, which is lines 3087 to 3092, to say authorize the licensee to purchase and add new language or take possession of retail marijuana. Those are the first three amendments.
Okay. Committee discussion on those amendments? Taking any concerns or thought or opposition at all to those sort of technical amendments?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Servo.
do you need us to be making motions on any of this, or are we operating by a unspoken consensus?
We are operating by consensus. If I hear no objection, we're going to adopt and make a recommendation of the full committee with the recommended line amendments.
Got it. Okay. So we'll make sure the process was clear.
Okay, and then
All right, so hearing no objection, we're going to make those recommended amendments to the full committee.
And then, Mr. Chairman, online, there was an interest in permitting retail marijuana establishments to purchase hemp products. 2954, to add language. And that would be to add a section B that would say a marijuana manufacturing facility, marijuana wholesaler, a marijuana cultivation facility, and a retail marijuana store may acquire hemp products made with or from industrial hemp grown in the Commonwealth and processed by an industrial hemp processor registered pursuant to Virginia Code Section 3.2-4115 and in compliance with state and federal law. And I believe council has that as well.
Eben, this would help to make the connection then between the new structure, the new licensure, the new, I guess, wholesale retail components, into the industrial hemp framework. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Any committee discussion on that item?
Okay. And
Okay, hearing none, we'll make that recommendation to the full committee.
further, Mr. Chair, there was another suggestion to permit industrial hemp processors to obtain a marijuana establishment license. That could be more controversial. This would be like if we, when we allow the
Senator Eben, can you direct the committee to a line number?
line 2954 to add, I believe this is additional language that I sent to council. It would be the board shall not prohibit an industrial hemp processor registered pursuant to Virginia Code Section 3.2-4115 from being issued a marijuana manufacturing facility license, marijuana cultivation facility license, a marijuana wholesaler license, or retail marijuana store license. This would be similarly to how we could treat medical people who'd made an investment already within Virginia, and they would pay a fee similar to as described in the bill. So there would further be amending line 3160 to 3163 to say that any person who wishes to possess more than one license pursuant to subsection B shall pay a fee to the board. And the language that's in the bill now was $250,000 to limit vertical integration, or see that those that do vertically integrate would pay to the board so they could use that for the loan fund. And I would suggest that a larger dollar figure would be in order rather than $250,000 that throughout it changed to $1 million. And further read, shall pay $1 million fee to the board except for an industrial hemp processor. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know that the committee would want to accept that, except for, it said what was proposed, except for an industrial hemp processor. I don't know if that's a good idea.
Okay, so to walk through, Senator Eben, I guess a little bit finer point, it would allow some level of vertical integration, but much higher fee. The original as proposed in the bill was $250,000 fee. Is that correct? And what you're proposing is $1 million fee in order to more robustly fund the equity investment fund also established by the bill. Is that correct?
That's my proposal. And I should say I don't know that the industrial hemp people, I think they wanted to have no fee, but I don't know that that would be a policy goal of the committee. But if the medical people are paying a fee, I'm not sure why the industrial hemp people wouldn't. Or any other vertical integrated.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Boysko.
question for the patron about the, is this what you've seen in other states? Wondering if this is what we've seen in other states as far as setting up a vertical integration system, where I would like to hear from the patron how he decided to change.
This might be better from JLARC. This is a suggestion that came to me from the industrial hemp folks, but it might be better from JLARC to talk about the other states if they're available.
Well, Senator Eben, before we get that, maybe
Yeah.
we can walk through your suggested edits and changes once again, because I think there's a separate section for the fee in relation to the vertical.
Yeah.
This is in relation to adding, again, it's what, lines 2954, correct? And adding sort of the connection between...
That's the first one, that they should not be, line 2954, that they should not be prohibited, the industrial hemp people, from obtaining a license, other licenses.
Okay. And then a new section C is what you indicated?
That would be C. The board shall not prohibit an industrial hemp processor registered pursuant to Virginia Code Section 3.2-4115 from being issued a marijuana manufacturing facility license, marijuana cultivation facility license, a marijuana wholesaler licenses, or retail marijuana store license. Basically, if you're in the hemp business, that you shouldn't be prohibited from entering the other facets, and that's a question for you all.
Okay. And where it references registered pursuant to Code Section
3.115
is what section?
I'm going to pull that up. Let's see. 3.2. Oh, I believe that's the code section that deals with industrial hemp.
Yeah, so follow-up question to the Senator Eben, wouldn't those sections also need pursuant to the 4.1 sections that identify in other words, you want them to be able to apply, but it still would be under the requirements under this new code section for which license they would be applying to, and still subject to the individual license and fees and other requirements set out by the board.
Yes.
Okay, so just a note to council, I think we would want to make sure that the language does not create a framework that it's an automatic or there's no fee. What this should be identifying is they're allowed to pursue a license of these other new sections and categories. So having the crosswalk wouldn't necessarily prohibit it, I think is what Senator Eben is suggesting. Is that correct,
Yes,
Senator
sir.
Eben?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And then if I
Before we move on, just any discussion from the subcommittee on those suggested amendments from Senator Eben? Okay, hearing none, we'll also include those recommendations to the full committee. Senator Eben.
Then, if we're going to allow that, we could permit an industrial hemp processor to use the same facility to process both industrial hemp and marijuana. That would require an amendment by adding lines, I guess it's at line 3054 or so to 3056, amend it to permit them to use the same facility with language as follows. Retail marijuana products shall be prepared on a licensed premise that is used exclusively for the manufacture and preparation of retail marijuana or retail marijuana products, and using equipment that is used exclusively for the manufacture and preparation of retail marijuana or retail marijuana products. The board shall permit an industrial hemp processor registered pursuant to Virginia Code Section 3.2-4115 that is also a licensed marijuana manufacturing facility to manufacture and process both industrial hemp and marijuana in the same facility with the same equipment. There was also an interest about the board, but I think we perhaps should wait till we get to that area, sir.
Yeah, if we could. Any comments on Senator Eben's suggested amendments, edits from the subcommittee?
Mr. Chair, I don't know if we finished talking about the fee for having multiple licenses or...
Yeah, we need to circle back to that. But I believe, Senator Eben, I believe that fee is in a separate section and not in relation to the industrial hemp producers.
That's right. That's right. It was, it was just some commentary from someone who brought me this amendment, but that's in a separate area.
Yeah, so Council, we will circle back to that when we get into the license types and structure discussion. And just for the subcommittee's note, to be clear to our direction to Council today, that there may be cleanup items, and so the adopted items are concept, even though we've walked through language, if that's okay with the subcommittee, to ensure that we give Council flexibility to make the necessary edits and tweaks as he's revising all of these sections to make sure they flow together. All right.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, if I could, there are some other areas regarding medical cannabis, and I think it's important, Senator Kiggins noted that this is just a burgeoning program, a new program.
As we, Senator Eben, as we start out the section, just so the committee is able to scroll through the volume of the bill, to go ahead and call out the line number or section of the bill so we can start to get there and prepare for your comments.
Yeah, this is 4.1-600 definitions. If the medical folks are to be allowed to have retail as well, some of them invested as much as $30 million to set up their operations in Virginia, and there's a concern that if we have retail marijuana, that it could really impact their industry without them being able to participate in that as well. So if they were allowed to participate to add a definition in 4.1, 600, lines 2543 to 2621 or so, saying a new definition, co-located facility. Co-located facility means a pharmaceutical processor licensed under this title to perform the activities set forth in section 4.1-603, I believe it says B.17, and little 2I, contemporaneously operate a pharmaceutical processing facility, a marijuana cultivation facility, a marijuana wholesaler facility, a marijuana manufacturing facility, and a marijuana and a retail marijuana store at the same location. So basically, this would have the effect of allowing them to co-locate if you were to approve that.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Evans. Senator Kiggin.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask a question to the patron
Proceed.
about the amendment? Is this an amendment you're proposing?
Yes, sir.
Or
Yes,
that-
ma'am.
So can you just clarify what that might look like? Does that, when you say co-locate, does that mean it's within the same, grounds or facility? Is that,
I would imagine it wouldn't be in the same room, the retail, as the pharmacy, but within the same grounds or building.
okay, so there are currently some medicinal marijuana facilities, manufacturing, and storefronts in place. Then how will they be affected? Because they're in place first. So would there would then be a recreational marijuana store would have to be built with them?
Could be built next door or with them. They wouldn't be subject to that same 1,000-foot limit.
So I guess to clarify, Senator Eben, what you're proposing is the operator of the medical marijuana under the existing license could apply for the retail side and operate from the same location.
Okay.
I believe is what the language is proposing. Is that correct, Senator Eben?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So it'd be the same operator
Yeah.
utilizing the medical dispensary and have the adult use also within the same complex. It's my understanding it's a much more vertically integrated for both sides, both of the retail and the medical side.
Okay. And I don't know how that would affect the price point of the products that each offers, but I worry that the ease of which you could, obtain the recreational marijuana would just be, it would again just shadow what the medicinal marijuana people in industry have really worked hard to do, and that I think is a great thing that they're doing and for patients. But so I just worry again about taking the spotlight away from that industry, especially when they're just getting off the ground. We should give them time to get started and to do things the right way and to really learn from them. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Sure. And Mr. Chair, if I could just answer the
Senator Eben.
Senator, to say that there would be, the excise tax wouldn't be posed on the medical product. So that would be an incentive for people who are truly in medical need to do it properly. And this is mainly so that the medical people wouldn't, I don't know if they would go out of business, but they've invested so much money. And the problem is that some people will not use them to start with, and that if this will still allow them to, I think it would ensure that they stay in business. And there will be a period of years, especially now that we're setting up a separate agency for the medical industry to mature a bit before this were to happen. But I recognize your concern. So that was for the co-located facility. And then further in the definitions of marijuana establishment, and I apologize for not having the line number handy, but it's further in that section alphabetically, to say marijuana establishment means a marijuana cultivation facility, marijuana testing facility, a marijuana manufacturing facility, and then insert the language, a co-located facility before a marijuana wholesaler or retail marijuana store, just to make the distinction that it's not the same as a regular marijuana store, but it's co-located.
And that would be line 2585, marijuana establishment.
Thank you, sir. And then after non-retail marijuana products definition, to insert a definition of a pharmaceutical processor that just is in the same code section, it would just say pharmaceutical processor means an entity that has obtained a permit pursuant to 54.1-3408.3. There was one other.
Before, any subcommittee discussion on those items before we move on? Just want to, Senator Kagan's.
I just have one more comment, not to beat a dead horse, but I just don't know what the incentive would be for my patients or patients in general who are in need of medicinal marijuana to have a discussion with a pharmacist and a healthcare provider to get the right form and the right dose. What would be their incentive besides maybe a slight price difference? But I just worry about people that I want to use the product and use it right to opt for just going to the store, because the medicinal marijuana facilities, there's not going to be as many as some of those recreational stores. So the ease of getting it for them, they would just go to that and then not go through the way that, as a healthcare provider, I would like to see them go.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Then
Senator,
the other was.
hold on, Senator. Counsel?
Mr. Chair, just to clarify here, in adding this language about a co-located facility, was there language that prompted this that was interpreted to prohibit a co-located facility? I'm just trying to get at, what we need to add versus what we're actually prohibiting. I'm not aware of anything that would prohibit a co-located facility, and we have a provision that says these pharmaceutical processors can get a license. So I'm just trying to make sure if we're adding all of this in, is there something that we need to fix that looks like it was prohibiting this practice in the first place?
The only thing that comes to mind, Mr. Chairman, is that there's a prohibition of being within 1,000 feet of another marijuana store. I guess it's not a prohibition against being near a pharmaceutical marijuana purveyor.
In addition to the definition of marijuana establishment, I think wouldn't fall within the defined other terms of cultivation facility, marijuana tested facility, manufacturing facility, and the other definitions. So I think there was desire for clarity of what that would look like or mean. In case it create a conflict with the existing pharmacy medical use license.
Then, Mr. Chair, the other.
Real quick, Mr. May, any other clarifying questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Servell.
So a question. I don't remember any testimony yesterday about, and I could be not remembering things right, about what we're doing right now, and in terms of putting the hemp and the marijuana folks together. I mean, have we taken any testimony about that and how some of the potential stakeholders out there would see that, or? Yeah. I mean, I just, I mean, there's a lot of people that are growing hemp right now or trying to grow hemp right now. I mean, we passed that bill, I don't know, I think it was Delegate Yost's bill about 4 years ago.
I'll ask the clerk if we have any attendees specifically that want to speak to industrial hemp that may be on the line. If so, please raise your hand.
Or I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, or people that from the marijuana side that might have concerns about allowing hemp growers to.
Senator Servell, so amended. Those who wish to speak to the generalized issue of industrial hemp, please raise your hand.
Dylan Bishop, please unmute yourself.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, Dylan Bishop on behalf of the Cannabis Business Association of Virginia. We did provide some testimony yesterday about an intention to merge existing operations of hemp processors into the recreational marijuana industry, and we do support all of the amendments that have been proposed thus far. We do think that there's opportunity for these folks that have the requisite skills to grow this cannabis plant. They've proven thus already through the industrial hemp program, and we would just like to expand commercial opportunities for small and medium-sized Virginia businesses and Virginia farmers. So we do appreciate this initiative altogether and every amendment that's been proposed thus far. So we appreciate the consideration of the subcommittee. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, question for him.
Senator Servell.
So I'm clear, though, you're representing the existing hemp industry that wants to build on their hemp, right?
Yes, yes, and a more broad base. So we also represent entities that would like to expand into additional regulated markets, and also folks who would like to expand commercial opportunities within the pharmaceutical side of things as well.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator McDougall.
and maybe this is too hefty a concept to ask, and if y'all have considered it. Right now, hemp is legal in the United States federally, and so certainly it could be shipped across state lines. Marijuana is not. So when we put the two together, does that create any interstate commerce questions for
I
you?
know, right?
I guess we lost him.
Mr. Chairman, was that question directed at me? I'm sorry, I wasn't clear.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Do you need me to repeat it?
No, sir. So we would be perfectly okay with restrictions on any kind of involvement in the recreational marijuana industry being strictly tied to intrastate sales, and I think that would address any concerns about interstate commerce.
Mr. Chairman, if I could
Senator McDougall.
maybe focus my question a little bit more. Have y'all done any analysis about if it's regulated in the same way that part of your product is interstate commerce available, part of it is not? Does that create any issues? Have y'all discussed that or thought about it at all?
No, sir, we have not done that analysis.
Senator McDougall, Senator Eben, I think.
Yeah, just to point out that the last lines of one of the amendments was in compliance with state or federal law. So they would be required to comply with federal law in the amendment.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator McDougall.
I don't have any questions about that. My question is more on the interstate commerce. What can you regulate to be just in Virginia, which if something's not legally able to be transported across borders, that's certainly the case. But I don't know that we can make industrial hemp the same rules that you could make, because that can be transported across borders. And so that's really what my question is, as we put these rules together, if we're combining everything together, are we creating a potential issue? I don't know the answer to it, that's why I'm just broaching the question.
Okay. Other speakers, maybe another speaker will be able to provide more clarity to Senator McDougall's question. I'll open up to the next speaker for comment.
Nagista Abebe, please unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you for that. Nagista Abebe here with Columbia Care, and also speaking on behalf of the medical processors. I just wanted to speak to the issues around medical inclusion and just point out no state has undergone adult use without including the medical market. From our experiences in other states and what we've seen happen, if medical is not able to co-locate adult use and medical operations in the same facility, the medical program will remain incredibly costly, and it's already difficult for patients to participate because no part of the process is covered by insurance. And when adult use operations are able to manufacture at a much larger scale than the medical operations are, without being able to co-locate, patients will be priced out of the medical market and will be driven either back into prescriptions that they may not be wanting to take because they're not as therapeutically effective, or into the adult use market where they won't be able to consult a pharmacist. They'll be less likely to be talking to their medical providers about their treatment, and that's really important. The other piece of this is there are patients who are just not served by an adult use market. There are folks who are in institutions or hospice care, or children under the age of 21 who need to be able to get their medication and need to be able to participate. The amendment that we put forward and submitted earlier this week allows for a process for medical inclusion, so that that supports the equity goals. I think based off of the report and the JLARC numbers, the 30 medical processors would be at most 15%, or the 30 retail satellite dispensing locations for the pharmaceutical processors would be at most 15% of the market, which is the smallest share that any state would have managed at this point in a transition to adult use. I will stop there, but available for any other questions around medical inclusion.
Great, thank you. Next speaker.
Brenda Waller, please unmute yourself.
Good morning. Representing Southside Virginia, District 5. So I'm here, I guess, a lot of twists and turns as a medical professional who has 30 plus years of practice with physical medicine and rehabilitation, focusing mainly on individuals with disabilities and chronic pain. So I wanted to first give my approval of the bill that's going forward currently. And I think that the legalization will offer access to some of the disenfranchised patients that I currently treat. I will say that I am in favor of the medical marijuana program, but there are a lot of barriers for my patients to get to those products now. So I think opening up the access will be beneficial. On the other hat that I'm wearing currently as president of the 2020 Farmers Cooperative, I am a licensed hemp grower here in Virginia with 2 years experience. And I do feel that opening up the access for the marijuana grow for hemp farmers will increase their bottom line. My concern is that from what I'm hearing in the license fees, the amounts and whatnot, that you're still going to have an issue with disenfranchising the small minority farmers that have an opportunity to improve their farm operations with this new crop. So I would like to agree with Mr. Bishop in that we as hemp farmers are welcoming any opportunity to increase the operations on our farms. But I do want to make sure that there is equity for minority farmers. And for those of you who may be familiar with the bill that Representative Denver Riggleman proposed last year concerning the hemp opportunity zones, which allows some tax credits and some grants for low-income farmers to participate.
Thank you. If you can wrap up your comments, ma'am, I want to make sure we get to other speakers.
That's fine. I appreciate your time and thank you for your public service.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your comments. And I know the committee is very concerned also about the social equity and ensuring those existing small farmers are able to participate. So other speakers? Okay, no other speakers for this topic. Senator Serval, did that resolve some of your questions for Senator McDougall?
Mr. Chairman, not really. I didn't hear anybody really address the question. I mean, I understand all these people want to see this happen, but I didn't hear anybody really talk about the risk of putting hemp and marijuana together. And I appreciate, that they support what we're trying to do, but we're trying to deal with a very fine point here, which is whether or not putting an unregulated product together with a regulated product at the same farm, is really a smart thing to do. I don't know. Maybe this format isn't really akin to getting good feedback, but.
All right, before we move on, I'm going to see if we'll throw a lifeline to Deputy Secretary Copenhaver and see if in his review of the governor's report, they came across this issue and maybe how other states have addressed it. Deputy Secretary.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to address this. we have reviewed this. I've talked to our folks at VDAX. We do not see any issues as long as the products are kept separate, especially on a cultivation facility. If you have one side of your farm that is hemp and one side of your farm that has a marijuana cultivation facility license, we don't see any issues with that.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Deputy Secretary.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator McDougal.
Brad, I guess what the Senator Survell and I are trying to ask is there's a lot that can come about based on regulation through interstate commerce. So if you're growing the product separately, it's great, but my guess is you're using the same equipment to do the tractors, you're using the same equipment to harvest it. Are you storing it in different places? Are you transporting it with different vehicles? When all those things come to account, does that create any issues on the hemp side when we're doing it, when we're putting the regulation together? Because certainly if you ran separate processes, didn't use any of the same equipment, didn't use the same books, computer systems, all that, maybe that doesn't, but I can't imagine that these operations are going to buy a separate everything to run it, because that defeats the whole efficiency. So if y'all looked at it from that direction?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Senator McDougal. What our understanding is, as long as the products themselves can be separately labeled and identified, and that everything is kept separate, and that we can track and trace that, then we would not have any issue with those, even if you're using the same equipment, as long as the products themselves, which is what the federal law speaks to, then we would not have an issue with that regard.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for
Senator Boysko.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary. I'm looking at an article from California in 2019 where they were having challenges with hemp and marijuana being grown close together, and saying that the cross-pollination actually reduced the value and the yield of the overall profitability because the plants were cross-pollinated, basically. And they're saying that basically they need to be at least 10 miles apart. Is that what you're talking? I mean, if we were to have someone co-located but they're separate, what would be that line, and do we need to put that language into the bill?
Again, I think that the issue would be, and the way I understand it, and we have other experts I know who are on this call who can speak to the science of cannabis cultivation better than I can, is that the problem would be with the hemp plants reducing, cross-pollination, reducing the THC content of the marijuana plants, and I think that's a very an issue that is real, but I don't think related to the legality question of being able to cultivate those in the same facility. I do think our hemp program is very clear that no cannabis sativa plant with the concentration greater than 0.3% can be considered industrial hemp, and we have a testing regimen in place to address that. And so nothing with that regard would change if the crop is over 0.3% or over what is currently or over what is allowed by federal law, then it would not be industrial hemp. And I just want to point out, as the administration, we don't have a position on this amendment. I'm trying to just provide some technical expertise.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Survell.
Thanks. So
I'm gonna narrow down this to another 5-minute discussion. Then we're going to need to move on.
Yeah.
And this item will need to be picked up in judiciary.
Got it. Well, my question's either for Copenhaver or for Deputy Secretary Copenhaver or for JLARC. I mean, and I don't remember this being teased out in the JLARC report, but I mean, did anyone look to see whether any other states are allowing people to grow both this unregulated product and the regulated product together? Because I mean, it just strikes me that if you're trying to go in and do an audit or an enforcement and all the stuff's mixed up together, it could create some enforcement problems. I mean, trying to just figure out what's going on. So if either JLARC or hold on, the chairman walked away from his mic for a second. Hold on.
Senator Serval, you wanted to direct to J-Lark?
Either J. Lark or Secretary Copenhaver. Hopefully they give us a quick answer.
All right, so those panelists, whoever wants to take it, raise your hand and I'll call on you. So who's all right, Mark Ribben, J-Lark.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Serval, we did not get too in the weeds, pardon the pun, on the hemp issue. A lot of states do allow that. The short answer to your question is that if a hemp grower is growing hemp and marijuana, there could be some complications unless there is a good tracking in place. So if that hemp, if the marijuana licensing program or that hemp grower has a marijuana growing license, then they should also have all their plants tagged. So that should then be able to clearly separate the marijuana crop from the hemp crop. And as Deputy Secretary Copenhaver was saying, as long as those two things are kept separate and that hemp is not then nobody attempts to try and sell the hemp crop into the marijuana market, there should not be an issue. There might be some questions from law enforcement about, or raise some concerns with law enforcement about the hemp side, but that's a separate issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gribben. Any other discussion from the subcommittee on this item? All right.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Kagan.
Sorry, I just have concerns about the proposed changes to the fee increase of up to $1 million, the discussion of the vertical integration from the hemp industry. Is there any way we can have Nigist offer the medical industry's perspective on that issue?
Sure, Senator Kiggins, I appreciate that. And I just want to touch on one.
BB, thank you.
Okay, can folks hear me?
Yes.
I did, before I respond to that initial question, Senator, I did just want to address one other element here on some of the medical inclusion, which is one other key factor for co-location is being able to ensure that the supply chain can stay, does not end up bifurcated too early in the medical context. It's very hard for us to, at the stage of a clone or plant, to determine whether that plant is going to be for a medical product or an adult use product. And so just making sure that we're set up for integration in a way that allows us to still maintain our operations in a cost-effective and streamlined manner for patients. On the fee increase, I think that for one point, I think of distinction between the pharmaceutical processors compared to the hemp industry at this point in Virginia is processors already participated in a very competitive RFP process that had a $10,000 fee and have already paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to the state in order to be an incredibly highly regulated industry. At this point, we've also invested, each facility is anywhere from $10 to $20 million of investment, and we've not even been open for more 6 months at this point. So I think when we talk about fees for future opt-in, to the extent that we can be conscientious of the level of investment that has already been put in different programs, we would love to be able to continue that conversation before a fee is settled on for pharmaceutical processor inclusion.
Thank you for those comments. There are certainly many opportunities to have this continued discussion. I think the committee's concern is obviously the investment into the equity fund, ensuring that there is sort of continuous funds to meet some of the social equity goals. In addition, we were concerned, I think as a subcommittee, on the impact of allowing vertical integration and its impact on forcing other small businesses or businesses that are just starting up out of the market, or not even allowing some of those small businesses get off the ground. So I know that the subcommittee is sort of searching for the right both funding sources as well as the right framework. If full vertical integration, which is what is being discussed, what negative impacts is this going to have on the social equity applicants as they start out on day one? So I'm not sure we have the right balance yet, but that's sort of the work of the subcommittee, and we've got to figure out the right solutions for the full committee as well as this bill moves forward through the body. Any further discussion? David May, Council.
Mr. Chair, so just a couple clarifying questions here. It looks like with the definition of co-located facility that was attempted to be inserted here, which allowed the pharmaceutical processors to basically have a cultivation license, manufacturing license, wholesale license, or retail license, and do it at the same place where they're operating their medical facility. One, in that definition, it cites that it's going to allow them to perform activities set forth in 41603B17, which does not exist in the bill. So I'm just trying to figure out, one, what citation there should really be there. And then also note that any modifications that I'm aware of, and tell me if I missed anything, but any modifications that I'm aware of that we've made to 4.1-618B maybe didn't properly allow for this co-located facility in that it currently says retail marijuana products have to be prepared on a licensed premises as used exclusively for the manufacture and preparation of retail marijuana products, and with equipment that's solely used for that as well. It looks like we did add something in there about the hemp processors, but we did not say anything about the pharmaceutical processors.
Senator Eben, it sounds like council is suggesting a friendly amendment. Do you agree?
That would be fine.
All right. Any discussion from the subcommittee? All right. Thank you.
And then,
Mr. May?
Mr. Chair, if I could just
Senator Eben.
give you the last one on the medical, which I believe is also part of lines 2744 to 2813 under regulations of the board, to add 17. Establish standards and requirements by which the board shall, by January 1st, 2023, allow co-located facility licensees to cultivate, infuse, package, wholesale, transport, and sell marijuana and marijuana products to marijuana business establishments, and 2I, allow a co-located facility licensee to sell retail marijuana at its cannabis dispensing facilities pursuant to 54.1-3442.5, 3I, deem a co-located facility to be exempt from the provisions of 4.1608 through 4.1612, and certify the co-located facility licensee has sufficient quantities of medical cannabis and medical cannabis products available to meet the reasonably anticipated demand of registered medical cannabis patients. And lastly, on C, following 17, where it says 1, limit the number of licenses issued by type or class to operate a marijuana establishment, to limit, to strike the language that says, however, the board shall not limit the number of Class D marijuana cultivation facility license issued. That would give the board the ability to limit them, I guess.
So, I guess, two sections that were suggested to be edited by Senator Eben, one of which providing a new definition, a new item 17, establishing standards and requirements by the board to allow co-located facilities licensed to cultivate, infuse, package, and the rest of the items that you listed. Any discussion on that item? And so it sounds like what it's also trying to do is to make sure it's sort of not a faux medical facility, but it is meeting the intended purposes also of the co-location, as I read it, Senator Eben.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then the next item, if you could reread that again, please, Senator Eben.
The language that's stricken, or the new 17?
The second item, I think we've already covered item 17, so is the next item that you want?
It was under C, where it says the board may promulgate regulations that. Right now, 1 reads, the board may promulgate regulations that, 1, limit the number of licenses by class or type or class to operate a marijuana establishment, and then to strike the language that would prohibit the board from limiting the number of cultivation facility license issued. So this would allow the board to limit them.
All right, subcommittee on discussion on that item. I'd like to hear from Deputy Secretary Copenhagen. Brad, if you're on the line in that regards, it seems like there's probably, I believe in either the governor's report or the JLAC report, some interest in providing a limitation. That's why I assume that was in the original introduced bill in terms of the number of licenses, so there's not an oversaturation. And wonder if you had comment on that item.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I think that in the bill, I see that says Class D. I think that's a typo. That should be Class B. If you look at the cultivation licenses in the license section of the bill in Article 3, we have Class A and Class B. Class B is the low THC. That's the under 1% THC. That was what we included to kind of give some more flexibility to the folks who want to grow industrial hemp up to 1%. So I think our intention there was, we want the board to be able to limit the number of the number of licenses to kind of control the marijuana market. We felt like the up to 1%, that's not really going to be part of our recreational or adult use marijuana market. That's more for those hemp growers who want to grow up to 1%. And it would not be used in the same way. So that was the thinking there. But we're happy to have some further discussion about that or work on this. I don't want to take up the committee's time necessarily with debating this, because I don't think we feel strongly either way.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Eben.
If that's referring to the low THC industrial hemp, I would withdraw that. I don't think it's necessary.
Okay. So that line item is withdrawn from committee's consideration.
There were a few proposals dealing with the equity applicants and the board members, and lastly, the enactment clauses. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to?
Senator Eben, you want to go ahead and take on the social equity aspects?
Sure. I received a suggestion that regarding lines 2744 to 2813 under 14 about the social equity, that we might consider requiring, instead of the applicants, there was some stricken language. That an applicant, to add an applicant with at least 66% ownership by a person or persons who attended a historically black college or university, or an applicant that distributes at least 50% of its gross profit to owners or employees who, I'm just looking for the right, are members of a racial or ethnic group that has been disproportionately policed for marijuana crimes, or prohibit shared services agreements. I don't know what, for 5 years following the receipt of a license, a social equity applicant may only transfer such license to a person or persons who qualify under 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. In other words, that when you get a social equity license, you couldn't turn around and then sell it to a big company that's not social equity a month or a year later. You'd have to hold those licenses for 5 years or transfer them to someone else who'd qualify.
So, Senator Eben, it seems at least 3 different concepts, one of which is as currently written, the percentage of ownership within the social equity standpoint is 51% as written. What is being suggested is to increase that to 66% ownership. The second item is that for a qualified applicant, you've added also historically black colleges as a potential qualification, or a university. An applicant distributes 50% of its gross profits to its employees who are members of the qualifying section under the social equity section, and to prohibit essentially the transfer, as I read it, of a business license applicant under this section, within 5 years, it can only be transferred to another applicant meeting the same definitions. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so it's essentially, that last component is essentially preserving a social equity applicant license to a social equity applicant licensee versus transferring it to another entity or another holding group or something else. They have to meet those definitions under this code section and the review process that the board would set out. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Any questions from the committee on those suggested line amendments?
Mr. Chairman? Yeah, question for Mr. Evan. Could you go into a little bit of detail of the stakeholders who helped you get that amendment together? Just want to understand that we have buy-in from the community.
Senator Evan.
Yeah, this was offered by someone in the medical business who is interested in equity. As a suggestion, they don't have a. That's where it came from.
Any follow-up, Senator Boysko?
Mr. Chairman, wondering if anybody in the queue who's watching has any feedback on that?
Yeah, so I was going to ask to see if either the Deputy Secretary or Ms. Black Hackett may have input on the suggested amendments to sort of preserve the social equity licensees and ensure sort of within the first 5 years that it's not just flipped but transferred to another social equity licensee. If the administration or Ms. Black Hackett has any thoughts or comments on the suggested amendments here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. The administration does not have a position on that. Within our research and within the work group, we took a deep dive to look at what other states had done around the federal regulations in consideration of the federal regulations. So what we have right now is an attempt to utilize and create language that's thoughtful, but we've also spoken to stakeholders who seem to have an interest, as pointed out by Senator Evelyn. So I think it's reasonable to look at it and take a deep dive into considering that as an amendment.
Thank you, ma'am. Other questions on this item from the subcommittee members?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Kagan.
Which line specifically was the number 50? I see 51% in that paragraph several times. So was there a specific line it was changed to 60, or was it just one?
And I apologize, each reference where it said 51 to make it 66. That was the suggestion.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess a follow-up again to Ms. Black Hackett on the 51%. If you any thoughts or comments? I know the work group did a significant amount of work on that, and I think it would be maybe informative to the committee. We're sort of working to pick a number, and it's been suggested to increase the number to 66 or 51. Can maybe the work group or your work on this work group help to inform this subcommittee of sort of what's the right number? I'm not sure there's the right answer, so I apologize for putting you on the spot, but maybe some of your good work over the last year would help to inform the subcommittee.
Absolutely. What we were looking at is to ensure that there was no partnership that was just partnership on paper. And so we wanted to make sure that majority of the ownership in a cannabis industry belonged to someone who qualified as a social equity applicant. So the governor's office is definitely open to considerations to increasing or decreasing based on your thoughts about the amendment. But that was to the intent to make sure that a big, huge company did not come in and have a partnership just in language only, but to ensure that these measures that we've taken are utilized specifically for those who qualify as social equity applicants.
Thank you very much. Did Ms. Abibi have her hand up as well? Nice, if you're also, did you want to comment on this item as well?
Yeah, happy to. Having participated in a social equity application round in Illinois where we incubated 2 different groups, I just wanted to comment on 2 factors. One, I think raising an ownership threshold to 60% has been put forward by other groups on equity because it does allow an equity owner more ability to be able to sell and acquire capital on their own. It also put forward that it is important to have a regulatory body that is implementing regulations that also protect the applicant, including things like having a social equity applicant bill of rights in plain language so that folks can self-advocate and understand when they're being part of an inappropriate or exploitative business interaction. That said, I did also want to comment on a license transfer. One of the conversations that came up as Illinois was going through this process was the fact that the ability to have a license is also an opportunity to generate generational wealth, and folks might win a license and any number of things could happen. That means that they no longer want to be in the position of having to run that company for the full 5 years. And so to that extent, giving folks the option to sell the license and obviously maintain preference for a social equity applicant to acquire that license, but also acknowledge the issues around capitalization. And so if a license, I believe in Illinois, they set it up so that if a license was sold to a non-social equity applicant, in the process of that transaction, the state should be paid every fee waiver, any loans that were given as part of the social equity program would be paid back to the state, and the new setting up regulations so that the ownership transfer does not treat the new license, the new owner of the license, like a social equity applicant if it's not going to a social equity applicant, as one option for also protecting and correcting that. My final point is just that we were approached by folks, Columbia Care was approached by folks in Illinois who were looking for a partner like us. And so I think it's really important that we contain and address false partnerships or partnerships on paper only that are not actually benefiting a social equity applicant, but also recognize that there are very business savvy social equity applicants who are seeking out the expertise and capital that is available when they partner with some of the larger organizations, and it let businesses make the decisions that are best for their businesses while ensuring that there are protections and things to contain, again, exploitative or predatory partnerships.
Thank you for, and I understand you've participated on national work groups as well in regards to social equity in this industry. I just want to provide clarity to the subcommittee in regards to the change from 51% to 66%. You see that as a positive change, or is that the right number, or is that reflected in other state legislatures' legislation?
I don't know that we've seen it reflected in any state's legislation yet, but I know that it's been used as a way to, it's been a number that's been floated by different groups. And so I don't think that it's, I think it's a reasonable number in order to ensure equity applicants have, again, agency and ownership over their share. Because when it's 51%, if you give any bit of your capital away, you risk no longer being in control of your company. And there are some folks who will be okay with that, but there are other folks who want to maintain their 51% and they still need a little bit of ownership that they can be using to bring in their own capital, regardless of who their other minority partner might be.
Thank you very much for helping to clarify and informing the subcommittee in that regard. Any other follow-up subcommittee discussion on this item? Council.
Mr. Chair, regarding the provisions related to the transfer, if you look at line 2962, which is in 4.1-615, provides that no license shall be transferable from one person to another or from one location to another. So if we are going to say you can't transfer one of these licenses for 5 years, then we're going to need to amend the section that says that you can't transfer it at all. Or maybe that already fixes the problem, that it can't be transferred, so they couldn't evade this because they can't transfer it to anyone.
Amendment that's proposed on the transfer is not necessary with the rest of the way things are written so far?
Mr. Chair, Senator Erwin, yeah, if we leave the other language in 615 the way that it is, yeah, it prohibits anyone from transferring their license. It makes them non-transferable.
Okay, that might be something to
Yeah,
revisit
so
next year.
I'd ask Deputy Secretary Copenhagen on maybe the intent as written in this language of, is the intent that there is never any transfer of license, and what that sort of would mean if, in terms of, as one of the speakers just said, if there's a future transfer or intergenerational wealth or another, small business owner transfers that to a family, or what does that mean? Or maybe there's a fix there. Is that the intent, Deputy Secretary?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. I think when we wrote that, I think one of the things that we were envisioning was addressing that problem with social equity applicants. I feel like maybe if we wanted to add in specifically in the social equity section about that license transfer and maybe fix it in on line 2962, that may fix the problem in a more direct way, as my understanding of what we were trying to do when we drafted that.
Okay, any follow-up for the Deputy Secretary on this item? And Council, do you have clarity from the subcommittee in terms of intent of direction of allowing transfers for social equity?
Mr. Chair, I guess I would just point out that, the section, another section that's relevant here is section 4.1-634. Starts on line 3482. This is your section about when you apply for a license. There's criteria in here that you have to meet when you apply for a license. If we allow a system in which you can just get a license and then transfer it to someone else, then you're usurping these application requirements, one. And but yeah, I mean, like I said, there is a reason for having that non-transfer language. We have a check system here to make sure that you should have a license, and that's by making you go through this application process. So I think in addition to what Brad was saying on the social equity piece, I think that's another piece that justifies not allowing a license to be transferred. So again, if we retain that language, I think we're okay. And I think we do successfully protect the transfer of the social equity, and we protect against the people evading the application process.
Gotcha. And follow up, Mr. May, right now in ABC rules, we don't allow transfers either of the license itself. Now, the business entity theoretically could apply for a new license and accept the business ownership and then transfer that to the new license, theoretically.
Mr. Chair, I do believe that one of the situations that's contemplated underneath the ABC rules is when, say you've got a restaurant on Main Street and someone comes and buys that establishment. I think it does allow them to, at least for a temporary amount of time, continue to operate underneath the provisions of that license. But I'm pretty sure that at some point they've got to go through the process. It's just, they're not going to shut them down for that period in which they're, going through their application process or doing their background check or whatever it is.
Right. So
I think we got.
It sounds like the intent of the same intent is here in terms of clearly any new applicant would still go through the license process review, the rest of the background check that the board's regulations still need to promulgate, right? And then upon issuance, but it is not the license itself that's transferring versus the business entity.
Yeah, I believe at some point there, like I said, I think ABC is on the line. If we can get them to expand on it. I'm not sure the technicalities of how to. I just know that we allow for that transfer, that temporary transfer, to allow them to continue to operate at least for a certain amount of time.
Okay.
I'm not sure if they end up issuing their own separate license after that, or whether they're assuming that license, assuming that they meet the requirements for it.
Okay. I'm going to ask Travis. I see you turn your camera on, so thank you. The question's coming to you, maybe to help us connect some of the dots with some of our existing practices at ABC in this regards. Mr. Hill.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think this is probably carried over from the way ABC operates, where we do not allow businesses to transfer licenses to one another. What happens is, if you're acquiring a business that has an ABC license, you have to apply for your own ABC license. We do have a process called a COOP permit, which allows for a temporary operation under the existing license until you get your own. But under no circumstances do we allow a business to sell their ABC license to a new acquiring business. They have to stand on their own merits to continue to operate going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Any other follow-up from the committee?
Mr. Chair, I appreciate
Senator
that.
Boyce, go.
I appreciate the feedback that we've gotten. I would say that I feel I can support the 66%. I would rather that we don't mess with the language on transfer. I like the way I feel it's more protective the way we have it currently.
So I guess to clarify, Senator Ebbins' amendment my understanding is an attempt to sort of preserve social equity to social equity's licensing framework to ensure that next applicant, just to be clear, it's sort of like preserving affordable housing?
Exactly. I agree
But
with
you
that.
do not want that?
Well, I want to, I don't want to see the,
Misunderstood.
Mr. Chairman, I think that bringing up the idea of the transfer between owner and someone new without having to go through the social equity piece is a concern for me. I feel, and I would ask David May if my understanding is correct, that the way it's written in the bill currently, we have those protections. Is that correct? And then changing it to say that we could transfer in 5 years would actually be weakening it. I would like just that clarification.
Mr. Chair, Senator Boyce, that would be correct, and that Senator Evans' amendment basically said that for 5 years, you got to wait 5 years before you could transfer a license that was held by a social equity applicant to another one. But the rules right now say you can't transfer it out at all. The only sense I can make of this, because this doesn't give social equity applicants any extra protection. In fact, it kind of weakens the whole system, like Senator Boyce was pointing out. I see where they're going with it. If you wanted to do something that maybe got at that point more effectively, if the board places a limit on the number of licenses that are issued, say, okay, and then all of these licenses are applied for and issued within 3 years. Say one of the social equity applicants foregoes their license. They're not operating anymore. You could have a provision that requires that for that 5-year period, that now that one license has opened up in the system with a limited amount of licenses, that upon filling that slot again, that the board shall fill the slot with another social equity candidate. So that reserves that slot for them, but does not allow them to transfer the license, because I don't think that's a road we want to go down, allowing them to transfer a license.
Right. Okay.
Mr.
I
Chairman,
think that
thank you.
helps to clarify.
That does.
Thank you for pointing that out, Senator Boysko, of maybe in concept as a way to rewrite it to get at the intent while still preserving our current practice of not transferring licenses, but reserving the slot. I guess as one follow-up question, the equity fund also could, as a part of its equity rules and regulations, require transfer of equity and loans, repayments, and other things for a period of time if there's sort of a transfer of monetary value or initial investment from that fund to require that transfer, if it's to occur, to also go to a social equity applicant. We don't need to write that necessarily into this law, but they could adopt essentially use of those funds to accomplish sort of similar goals, could they not?
Mr. Chair, that would be correct. And there's other provisions as well in the bill that clearly place an emphasis on this, to the point where we even, we're definitely giving priority to the social equity applicants for that first period when most people will be applying. But there's also, clear, more broad directives for them to address this issue in the code. So there's plenty of authority in the code for them to do something like that. It's just a matter of how specific do we want to get versus allowing them versus telling them to do it.
Okay. Senator Eben, you want to withdraw that last line amendment? Okay. Any further discussion from the committee on now the revisions and what's amended before, no longer including the last item of sort of the transfers and giving council direction sort of to tighten up in concept?
Mr. Chair, just one other thing I want to clarify.
Senator Boysko?
Mr. Chair, if we are requiring 66% capital ownership, I just want to clarify that there will be adequate access to capital for people who are in this category so that they can participate.
Senator Boyska, you want that question, I know it's a statement, but is there sort of a follow-up question maybe to direct it at the Deputy Secretary or other members of the participating governors group?
Yes, sir. I just want to make sure from the Deputy Secretary or Ms. Black Hackett if their feeling is that that is adequate.
Thank you, Senator Boysko. Deputy Secretary Copenhaver, would you aid in responding to the question? Brad can't hear you, so maybe we can try
Sorry,
to...
Mr. Chairman.
We can hear you now.
unmuted
Thank you.
myself in one place and not in the other. I apologize for that. Senator Boysko, I think you're exactly right that one of the largest barriers to entry for social equity qualified applicants is that access to capital. That's, we think that the loan fund that we're creating and having that administered through a CDFI will provide a big boost in getting that access to capital. Also, we're hopeful that at some point more financial institutions will be more comfortable with providing that as well. And then I think there's also other private equity out there that is focused on social equity. So I think this is one of the largest challenges, but I'm not sure that changing from 51 to 66%, as Ms. Abibi was stating, is a number that's being floated nationwide, is going to have a major impact on that. But it's obviously a big problem and one that we've attempted to address.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. Any other comments from the subcommittee? All right, Senator Eben, do you have additional line amendments?
And the one I should have brought up first was from VML on lines 3512 to 3514 on page 71 regarding the notice to local government. They noted that many small towns don't have a staff attorney and that elected sheriffs, should they receive the notice, may not share the information with the county or town governing body. So they suggest that we change it to town manager, city manager, or county administrator rather than the town or city attorney.
Okay. Subcommittee, you understand that amendment?
Mr. Chairman?
Any discussion? Senator Spruill.
Would that require a charter change from the city?
No, this would just be notice that would be sent to the city via their town or city or county manager or administrator. So it wouldn't require a charter change.
But, Mr. Chairman?
Senator Spruill.
Right now, they'll call whatever they'll call right now. So if you want to change that, it has to be approved by that town.
No, this is just sending a notice to the town.
So, yeah, maybe to clarify, Senator Eben, I also saw the note that several committee members received that the point is that some of these towns do not have city attorneys, and therefore they wanted to ensure that the notice was sent to the town administrator, manager, or other defined term, because there's not a designated city attorney per se that works full-time at all for the town. And so they wanted to make sure that notice goes to sort of the head administrator of that locality. And I think that helps to clear up where the notice is going, and it wouldn't involve any city or town charters at all.
Okay, thank you
Just
so
sort of
much.
administrative process. Yep. Any further discussion on that amendment from the subcommittee? Council?
Mr. Chair, my only recommendation there would be if we're going to do that, and maybe this helps with Senator Spruill's concerns a little bit, we could put in a little kind of broad language at the end to say, or their designees, so that if this doesn't fit the structure of a certain locality, that they can say, this is who we want this notice to go to. This is the person that deals with that in our locality.
Senator Eben, you consider that a friendly amendment?
I think that's a fine amendment.
Okay. Any further discussion from the subcommittee? All right, hearing none, we'll also move that recommendation to the full committee. Senator Eben.
Yes, on the advisory board, the 8-member advisory board, I believe, or 9-member advisory board, it was 7-member advisory board, if I'm not mistaken, with the chief equity and inclusion officer as an ex officio non-voting member. It was suggested that we may want to include someone who represents the interest of consumers or is an expert in policy as it relates to consumers, a small farmer, and an industrial hemp processor. And rather than make the board grow too large, it was some of those appointments were not specified as to who the existing ones were. So to make one of those a small farmer, and then to add additionally a citizen member representing the interest of consumers or an expert in policy as it relates to consumers and an industrial hemp processor.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Sproul.
I'm trying to look at the makeup of the advisory board. Who are the makeup now?
Let me pull that up.
The makeup of the advisory board. The key is this, so it was like I had the problem with the ABC yesterday doing this thing, knowing that their harm practices for minorities are not good at all. So on this advisory board, so how we can make sure this advisory board is made up fairly among our citizens that you put together?
Senator Eben.
I'm looking for the line with the board. 2622. Okay. So in answer to Senator Sproul's question, as written now, it would include 7 non-legislative citizen members to be appointed by the governor and an ex officio member. And they would be representatives of various segments of the cannabis industry, at least being a medical professional with experience in public health duties. At least one shall be a member of a historically disadvantaged community. And then I would add one about a small farmer. It says that each member would have been a resident of the Commonwealth for at least 3 years preceding the appointment, and the director of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion shall serve as an ex officio without voting privileges.
Mr. Chairman, that doesn't tell me that they can fit everybody that look like me. I don't want nobody to look like me. I want some look like me, some look like you, what have you.
Agreed.
You can find somebody that qualifies in all those things. I want to make sure that they all mixed up, not look like me, for example.
So, for actually this, so I'm going to ask the overall subcommittee's consideration. Based on the direction, we have not circled back since we made the decision to create an independent agency. Under the previous concept, this was an advisory board that then also basically advised to the ABC board. Now we've set up an independent agency. As written, we basically have many industry members basically self-regulating as under the new concept. I want to highlight to the subcommittee, we probably need to make a recommendation in terms of the composition and pulling out some of the elements of the skill sets that we want to represent the board. I'd suggest having multiple industry members representing the industry, also regulating the industry, is probably not a good idea, because this is now the key decision-making board overseeing the industry. And so maybe council, as we're looking at how to structure this and walking through an advisory board composed of all industry or like members, if we're modeling it off of an ABC board, but now it's removed from an ABC. I know you've been working on the draft last night and you haven't slept at all. No, but if you can help us comment maybe, because I think as we change the structure, the subcommittee needs to really come back and readdress the composition of the board and sort of authority of who's got what and how that also links to the other two boards still created. So sorry to complicate everyone's lives, but I do want to make sure the subcommittee has a level of discussion about this.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Chair. My plan was this, and tell me if you want me to do anything otherwise, but I was going to preserve all the current boards that are created by the legislation and create one more board, which would be the big board, which would basically be the same thing as the ABC Board of Directors. It's the grand board over top of everything. We would have, that would be where we would have this discussion of who do we want to see on that board. Because all of these would be retained, but that's going to be the big leadership board. So, that'll be something that we'll have to look at in crafting that, as how we want to tweak those membership requirements. But it will be a board of directors of the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Spruill.
my concern was whether it's the advisory board or the big board. I want to make sure they all are not black. I want to make sure they all are not white. That's my concern. I don't care what board it's on.
Senator Spruill, do you have specific line amendments or
No, sir.
suggested edits to this to help
I'm just saying,
improve to the ends that you see?
No, just the kids, I see what we're trying to accomplish, but I just want to make sure that we have a board that represents Virginia, as everybody like to say.
As a part of the subcommittee task, I've asked each member if there are specific edits that we bring them to the table. I think the subcommittee is very interested, Senator Spruill, in what you're suggesting. So I'll open up the subcommittee. If there's edits, or maybe council can also identify some sections, or maybe it's a work in concept to help better define membership to the board and or preference for board applicants that also made some of the social equity goals or experience. Deputy Secretary, as you've, I'm sorry, going to call you and maybe Ms. Black Hackett as a part of the work group of how maybe we could strengthen the language to resolve Senator Spruill's concerns with the legislation.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Brad.
Go ahead, Alacia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I would add to the conversation is one of the efforts from the Governor's Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion is to really push for a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan throughout all state agencies. And at the conception of this conversation about social equity throughout, one of the things we talked about is, and I mentioned this yesterday, is as this now new agency that's being considered is being processed and built in, is to ensure that equity is threaded throughout the entire construction of this new agency or this governing body. So I believe that even with House Bill 1993 that's coming, if we can really push to have that diversity, equity strategic plan that is embedded throughout this regulatory body, then some of the concerns from Senator Spruill will be mitigated. So that's kind of how we can look at ensuring, and with the presence of the Chief Diversity Officer as a member of the board, to really oversee those efforts to ensure that membership look like Virginians.
Thank you very much. Council, can we potentially figure out a common language for these multiple boards that would have both economic, social equity, and geographic diversity elements as a part of the consideration of the appointments, fitting those categories, or an overall statement? Or how has this been treated in other code sections?
Mr. Chairman, I just got
Senator Spruill.
I just got a text from a person who we all know. It says that we should add, for me to add language that says the governing board should reflect the diversity of stakeholders and the racial and ethnic diversity of the Commonwealth. Just an idea.
Yeah.
So,
Council, is there other code sections maybe that we could replicate to Senator Spruill's suggestion?
Mr. Chair, and to address that, Senator Spruill, one of the things that I had found that we've started to use in the code would read something like, regarding the appointment of members of the board, appointees shall reflect the racial, ethnic, and gender diversity of the Commonwealth. And we can also add some other items to that list if we want to, you mentioned geographic.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So discussion on the subcommittee, and it sounds like direction to council to, in concept, work, figure out a way to work that language in for the boards proposed under the bill. Any further discussion on that item? All right. Hearing none, we'll also move that recommendation to the full committee. Senator Redmond.
I had some amendments that were brought to me by the administration for the enactment clause about the years, but since it's a standalone agency, I think I should just offer those to council with the understanding that they're being advanced, things are being pushed back a bit. I can give you the specific line numbers and stuff in the existing bill if you'd like.
Yeah, Senator, but why don't we hold that? I want to make sure if we're going to take up the enactments as well as schedule at the end of the discussion today, because I think we certainly need to make some adjustments based on the subcommittee's recommendation to create an independent agency, and therefore, the JLARC reports and other recommendations was to, likely push the schedule back to take the additional time for the new structure, which would likely add a year to the enactment schedule based on the adjustments that are necessary as I read it. Is that correct, Senator Eben?
Yes, sir.
So what I'd suggested, Senator McDougall, I deferred earlier. Yesterday you had a discussion around definitions and wanted to circle back with you, Senator McDougall, if you had additional questions on the definition sections based on your additional reading yesterday and last night.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator McDougall.
I think that was on two line items, 2543 and following, and Mr. May and I discussed it after committee, and he was going to go back through. But just one example was it under manufacturing on line 2565, it says preparation of marijuana, but does not include cultivation. But when you read the definition of cultivation, I would think drying, curing, grading, or trimming is preparation of the marijuana. So there were some inconsistencies there, I'm sure, that were not intended but needed to be cleared up. And so Mr. May was going to take a shot at that. I don't know that he had a lot of things to take a shot at. I don't know that he got the opportunity to work on that between yesterday and today.
Okay. Also, we'll open up to if there are any sort of thoughts on framework, it's where some of the definitions came from, also from Deputy Secretary Copenhaver or the other staff attorney that worked on and through some of these items.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have Erin Williams from BDAX, and while she's getting pulled up, if staff could have her come into the meeting. I know that many of these definitions came from previous legislation, and we went through our process and then also the DLS process to ensure that everything lines up, and appreciate Senator McDougall's considerations and working with Mr. May on that. But I would defer to Erin. I don't see her coming up yet. Is she in the meeting?
Yeah, we just pulled her over from into a panelist, and Erin should be able to unmute, and she's on the line now.
Yes, Mr. Chair, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would I would echo Deputy Secretary Copenhaver's explanation that we pulled definitions from previous pieces of legislation attempting to create a adult use marijuana regulatory structure, specifically to Senator McDougall's question about the other preparation of marijuana language that appears in the definition of manufacturing. Certainly, we can work to clarify that if committee council feels that is necessary. I would offer, though, that the manufacturers would be working with marijuana plants in order to produce their marijuana products, and I think that that's kind of a broad kind of catch-all term for preparing that marijuana to become a marijuana product.
Mr. May?
Mr. Chair, yeah, I think, in speaking with Senator McDougall, I understand his concern, and it almost sounds like it was intentional here that there may be some overlap. But if you're going to allow for that overlap, you can't say manufacturing doesn't include cultivation when you just said that it did. If you're saying that cultivating is when you're really handling the plants, but if we're going to allow a manufacturer to handle the plants and do some things too and just call that preparing marijuana, then you are essentially allowed to engage in some activities that a manufacturer is engaging or a cultivator is engaging in. That doesn't make you a manufacturer or cultivator, but there may be a little bit overlap here. So I'm not sure that, I don't know how to account for that unless they can literally give me a list of every single thing that they're going to do and we can boil it down. But aside from that, I don't see a way to fix it unless you have a catch-all like that arguably there may be some overlap.
Senator McDougall, you have follow-up to that end, or are these items that would potentially be picked up by, in regulation and by the board as to clarify? And certainly there's time to come back and fix it. I think if there's further clarification or conflict as the regulations are developed and to further define. But Senator McDougall, you have any follow-up items on definitions?
Mr. Chairman, I would say as you look down, one of the other examples, immature plant produced from a cutting, clipping, or seedling doesn't talk about grafting, which is probably one of the ways that it would occur. So just there's some, I don't know that in those regards that they're the end of the world type of changes, but I just think that probably need to step down through this before it leaves this body, meaning the Senate, not necessarily the subcommittee, through the definitions. But again, as you come through, if you do things in regulation, that's certainly helpful, but if there's any sort of litigation in any direction, you're going to come back to the definitions. And if there's inconsistency, it's going to go for the parties. So, and it does seem like there's definitely some inconsistency. Mr. Chairman, there's one other
Senator McDougall.
Place that it's when we were going back through, and I guess it's 4.1-645, which is 3,738 and following, when it talks about, and this was the home cultivation section, just as you work down to D, the way I think I read this is you could, even though you're only legally supposed to have 2 adult plants, there's no penalty unless you have 5 or more adult plants. Was that intentional or accidental?
Senator Eben, do you want me to, let's go with Deputy Secretary Copenhaver.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is, Senator McDougall, that because we would be allowing up to 2 mature plants and 2 immature plants, that as a total of 4, that first under paragraph D, possession of more than 5 and 10 is meant to address that threshold of 4 plants total.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator McDougall.
I anticipated that was probably the answer, but the way it's written is if you have 4 mature plants, there's no penalty.
I see, Mr. Chairman, I see Senator McDougall, and I think that's something we can. The intention is that that we have a stepped up scale in terms of penalties for that, and so we are happy to work with council to make sure that we've got that language exactly right. But that is the intention.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary. Senator McDougall.
Mr. Chairman, I would, and David Mr. May could probably work on this to come back with for the suggestion for the full committee, but it probably needs to be possession of more than 2 mature or more than 2 immature plants opens up the penalties, and it's opposed to a combined number, but that would just be a suggestion.
Mr. Chair, I can come up with something. I am thinking also, as we're looking through this, of if you can have 2 immature plants and 2 mature plants, wouldn't it be having basically less to have 4 immature plants? I'm not sure if we would want to penalize having 4 immature plants, but it does say that you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to have more than 2 immature plants. So I don't know if we want to make a policy choice here to say you can't have more than 4 total, maybe, and only 2 of those can be mature.
So, yeah, as we were teeing up, this is on the agenda also for today. So, Senator McDougall, you're advancing our agenda rapidly, which is appreciated. But I did want to have a discussion and hear some of the Governor's Work Committee group on the number of plants and also help educate the subcommittee on the growing cycle. I, for one, have never grown a marijuana plant, but maybe others have, or I'm sure the work group looked at other states in terms of experience, in terms of, as we're setting up in this code section, personal home or personal cultivation, what does that mean to have 2 mature plants, I presume, at a flower cycle or some sort of cycle, and what does it mean to have 2 immature plants in terms of what that consumption means? Deputy Secretary Copenhagen, can you or one of your members of your team perhaps educate, if we're setting in the code, outside of fixing the penalties of the quantities, I think it'd be helpful for the subcommittee to understand what the cycle of maturity of the plants, what that means for personal consumption. Is 1 the right answer? Is 2? Is 3? Is 15? Help educate us a little bit.
Mr. Chairman, just to set the stage, and I will probably need to call in some friends from the other friends from the administration. Almost every other state that has legalized adult use marijuana has also legalized personal cultivation at some level. The work group discussed this. One of the things that we heard is that there could be an increase in certain public safety issues with home cultivation, especially with a larger number of plants. And so 2 mature, 2 immature was the number that the administration decided on when we were weighing all of this. But I would also point out to the subcommittee that immature plant is defined as a non-flowering marijuana plant, no taller than 8 inches and no wider than 8 inches. And so the idea here is that if someone wanted to cultivate in their home or cultivate for personal use, that they would be able to have up to 2 mature plants which are producing the flower that they could then use. Once those plants' flowering life is over, they would have 2 plants kind of coming up behind those that are non-flowering yet until they get to the point where they're flowering and they become a mature plant. And they kind of go through that cycle. So I know we have Assistant Secretary Katuan on the line too to talk about this a little bit more. And I would also, Ms. Sabibi from Columbia Care is more of an expert in the botanical horticultural aspects of this, and she may be able to answer some of those questions.
Mr. Chairman, question to the Secretary.
Senator Sproul, a question?
Yes, sir. Piggyback on what you were saying, my question would be, if I have 2 mature plants and 2 that are not, and what happened when the 2 that are not become mature, and someone happened to come by and check, and then I got 2 more immature plants, now I got 6. So am I supposed to make sure that the 2 mature plants are gone? Because you're talking about 2 mature plants and 2 that are not. And those 2 that are not, all of a sudden now they become mature plants. Now I got 4. So and then I start 2 more that are not immature plants, am I in violation of the law?
Mr. Chairman, I would answer Senator Sproul by saying that yes, the expectation is that once those immature plants become mature, that the person would dispose of the other mature plants, even in a way, or I guess they could dispose of one of the immature plants that has become mature. Either way, they would have to maintain no more than 2 mature plants at any one time. Okay. But that would be up to that person.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, Deputy Secretary, do we have someone who could help, again, I guess, better lead us? I don't know, a niece or someone else can help the committee to understand, for instance, the yield of flower to ounces or other measures of consumption. I see.
Mr. Chairman, I think
Mark Gribben with JLARC is raising his hand. So if you want to jump in and lifeline and help educate us, go right ahead, Mr. Gribben.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In our report, we looked at this issue of how many plants, and as Deputy Secretary said, most states allow home cultivation. The limits range from about 2 to 12 plants. Other states have had the same challenges that you were noting here in terms of if you are a regulator or an officer, determining what is an immature plant versus a mature plant. So in the extent that you use that type of language, you might need to think through a little bit more how that is defined, or it'll be left to the courts to figure that out. In terms of the yields, we did some calculations in talking with some folks in the industry. The yield of a plant can vary significantly depending on a number of factors, including what type of plant it is, the variety that it is, the conditions that it's grown under, how much light it gets, how many nutrients it gets, how good your gardener is. But we estimated in our report that a plant would be likely to yield 8 to 16, or 2 plants grown home can typically yield 8 to 16 ounces of marijuana per year, which we estimated would be enough for a moderately heavy user. Again, somebody growing plants that, a plant can die, it might not get as much as that, it might get more. So it's sort of a rough guess there.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Neist, I see you're also on the line. Could you help also to maybe continue the education process? Is there agreement on the number of ounces of yield per plant, and understanding that its yield varies based on the variety of the plant?
I'm happy to chime in. I'd also just point out, I believe Jen Michelle Padini from Virginia Normal is also on the line, and she might be better positioned to speak on this than I am. While she's being called up, or while they're being called up, I'll start with just the yield can vary greatly from plant to plant, and it's especially important to note that these are personal cultivators, not professional ones. So, that variance is probably going to be even higher. The only other thing I guess that I would add is, at all of our cultivation facilities, we have clone rooms, and different rooms based off of the different phases of the plant. And so it's pretty typical for folks to have an immature plant while they are waiting for a mature plant to finish flowering. Additionally, after the flower is matured, it then has to go through a drying and curing process before it is ready for human consumption. But I believe Jen Michelle is in here, and I'll perhaps defer to them.
Thank you. We have Jean Michelle Panini. I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name there, but Jen, if you could address the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that in regard to possession of personal cultivation amounts, 2 plants is certainly on the low end when you compare it to what other states are doing, and the immature plant possession limit is arguably less consequential than the mature plant possession limit. A number of states have a much greater allowance for the possession of clones or immature plants. As it's important to keep in mind that these personal cultivators are not professional cultivators, and most of them aren't going to be very good at it. We also have to make sure that there's an allowance for the total yield of whatever the person is able to cultivate, and that they're not limited to the 1 ounce that is currently allowed under the legalization proposal.
Thank you for that. That was going to be my next question. Is now one person at home has now harvested, theoretically, and/or prepared the material that they've cultivated. What sort of ounces does one yield from one plant? And does that put them in violation of the law that is not as written? Deputy Secretary? Or,
Mr. Chairman,
guess, yeah,
sorry.
From normal, I guess that's what you're also indicating. Is that correct?
It is, and generally, when personal cultivation is allowed in a state, the more common standard is that the individual is allowed to possess the total yield of their cultivated product, or there is a higher limit set for that possession.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Secretary?
I would defer to Assistant Secretary Jacqueline Catoon, who's on.
Okay, Jacqueline?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So just to be clear, this bill does not lay out penalties for possession for those over the age of 21 until you reach the point of either 5 pounds of unlicensed marijuana or 100 plants. Well, I'm sorry, 5 pounds of unlicensed marijuana will yield a penalty, but there is no charge for possession of marijuana less than that amount.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Sproul?
Now, would this be spelled out? Because if you got the folks who do not have the expertise as far as doing this kind of stuff, will this be spelled out? Let me know that 5 pounds or pounds that I can go to jail. So how would a person know unless they really are experts in growing this stuff and knowing how many plants equal this amount of pounds, that amount of pounds? So if someone could be in writing, let them know, say, hey, you can't do this over 5 pounds or over so many trees, you can't have this or that. How they gonna know that? Will this be in writing? So when you go in business, that you will have that somewhere, know what you can or cannot do.
Mr. Deputy Secretary or Jacqueline, who wants to jump in?
I'm happy to answer that question. Chair and Senator Sproul, thank you for the question. So this is strictly for unlicensed marijuana. So if you go out and you purchase marijuana from the store and you go over the course of multiple weeks and you purchase different amounts and you have more than 5 pounds of registered purchased retail marijuana in your home, there is no violation. If you have grown your 4 plants, you're too mature, too immature, you are only in violation if you have greater than 5 pounds of unlicensed marijuana. And my understanding is that 5 pounds of unlicensed marijuana would be a lot of marijuana to grow, and you would have to collect it over, and Jen Michelle, please correct me if I'm wrong, years. So this is really trying to get at folks who are growing a lot of unlicensed plants that they are not supposed to be growing. It is not supposed to be going after people who may be storing a lot of marijuana that they've purchased legally through a retailer at their home.
Thank you. Thank you for the follow-up questions, Senator Sproul. I'd also just like to comment, I think the personal cultivation section probably needs some additional language on requiring the board to provide home-safe guidelines or other resources, as I think Senator Sproul, sort of the how-to, not violate the law. And I think the language within this proposed code sections needs a little bit more clarity, whether it be heat, humidity, other in-home cultivation requirements to ensure home safety. In other words, avoiding halogen lamps or other fire materials in the cultivation process, whether it be LEDs or other best practice recommendations. It's my understanding that the industry is sort of responding with better technology in terms of home cultivation kits and other such things, but it might be helpful to be clear that if we proceed in this direction, that the new agency be directed to provide a resource of sort of best practices, safe practices, and sort of a knowing the law to ensure that people don't get tripped up with either the plant counts or immature plant counts and other guidance. Council, is that an okay direction and concept to move forward?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I can add something in to require the board of directors to issue a guidance document or some sort of resource for home growers to be able to access to ensure their safety and compliance with the law.
And publish it, make available, et cetera. You know, that's sort of the point on home safety. Any comment on that from either deputy secretaries? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Any comment from Senator Servo?
Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, Senator McDougal.
Could we go back to JLARC? I know that they talked about most states, but I thought I was under the impression that not every state allowed for home production.
Mr. Chairman?
Let's go to Senator Eben in regards to this question. Go ahead.
Yeah, every state does but one. And I should say that is my understanding, we can clarify that, but Illinois, though, only allows it for registered medical cannabis patients for home production. But you may want to clarify that.
So, Mr. Gribben, can you respond to Senator McDougal's question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator McDougal, yes, Senator Eben is correct. There is one state that only allows it under certain circumstances. Nevada also only allows home cultivation if you are a certain distance, live a certain distance away from a retailer. So there are 2 states, 1.5, depending on how you count it, that do not allow home cultivation. I'm looking through our report, and I can send you our appendix where we lay that out, each of the states and their status as to whether or not they allow home cultivation, as well as the amounts that they allow.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator McDougal.
The reason that I'm focused, and I maybe take a different perspective than Senator Eben does in regards to the overall bill, but the reason I'm asking more about the whole cultivation, particularly hearing the discussion about how much marijuana somebody could have at home, 4+ pounds, before there's any negative impact to them, is what protections for children do we have? I got a call the other day, it's not related to marijuana, but a child was OD'd in the hospital because they got access to their parents' illegal drugs, and they OD'd. And the kid was just a little bit over 1 year and almost lost them. And so clearly marijuana has a different impact than this drug did, but I do have some concerns about what kind of protections we're putting in place, particularly to something that is growing that you can pick leaves off of and it's easily accessible.
So, Senator McDougal, first draw your attention to line 3749 in terms of sort of the guidance laid out, which is taking reasonable precautions to prevent unauthorized access by persons younger than 21 years of age. You're suggesting some additional language. And, perhaps there's someone also on the call in terms of plant safety, whether or not something's cured or not in terms of THC yield. I'm uninformed as to all of the components to that, whether something is safe or unsafe.
Mr. Chairman, and Senator Serval, and maybe this is a more appropriate judiciary conversation, but take reasonable precautions. That's pretty nebulous. So if I tell my child, don't go in that room where the plant is that reasonable? Well, but to whom is that reasonable or not reasonable? So if you have a lock on it, if you have a do not enter sign,
Which line are we on?
3749. And Mr. Chairman, I'm assuming that somebody could, if a person under the age of 18 had access to it, probably wouldn't impact the person that was 18, 19, or 20, and something happened to it, then the parent or whoever was in possession of it could be charged with child endangerment as well. But the reasonable precaution seems extremely nebulous to me.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Spruill?
Serval. Yeah, no, and I think this is a discussion probably for the courts committee, but I know there's at least one United States Supreme Court case that says that the use of a reasonable standard in a criminal statute is per se vague because it's not clear enough to allow people to guide their conduct. there was a 1917 case about price fixing in World War I where they had to set reasonable prices, and the Supreme Court said that's not a criminal standard. But I think that's probably a courts committee discussion. But I agree with you that that doesn't really give anybody a lot of guidance. What's reasonable in one person's eyes is unreasonable in somebody else's eyes. It can vary substantially. So we have to look at that
Counsel,
later.
Mr. May.
Mr. Chairman, question to the senator that it'd be the same thing if you were saying about telling a child not to do something. Now, all the girls are nice, so I'm not talking about girls, little boys. I got 3 boys. My boys were small, and I said, don't play in that muddy water. And they said, okay, Daddy, you turn your back in 5 minutes, they're in that water. The girls don't do that because they're real nice. So I'm telling to my sons on the end that you talking about a child, tell a child don't go in that room, and you turn your back, they're going to want to know why you tell them that they're going in that room. And so I'm just using my boys for an example. They are always my heart. My daughter, I got one daughter, she's nice as she can be with my boys, always hard-headed. I said, don't do it. You might better go and tell them to do it. Thank you.
Counsel, I think you had some follow-up.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to note regarding the discussion about the term reasonable, and I would note that that section, it sets out these requirements for things you have to do to take reasonable precautions, but it doesn't have any penalties for any violation of that. It just looks at the amounts at the bottom. So really, it doesn't matter. You're supposed to do it, but there's no penalty in this, what appears to be a criminal section. Obviously, you may be guilty of something else for doing that. But for purposes of this section, it says things that you have to do, but then doesn't penalize you if you don't do them. And regarding the discussion earlier, which, again, this may be an issue for judiciary, but I think we do need to get the standard straight of you can't have more than 4 plants. Only 2 of those can be mature. And then if we want to have our threshold or our lowest level penalty up to 10 plants, then we should say something along the lines of you can't have more than 4 total, 2 of which can be mature. And if you violate those provisions, but you have 10 plants or less, then your penalty starts at $250, whatever the first one is for your first offense, which is already the amount set in the code. I think that's the way that we could clarify the rule based on what we already have, unless we're going to change something substantively. What they were getting at.
Appreciate it. Senator McDougall, that also seemed like a more reasonable framework and concept, given that it's going to go to judiciary as well.
Mr. Chairman, my preference would probably be no home production at all. Okay. But if it's going to be home production, then it needs to be clarified, and I think Mr. May kind of did that.
Thank you. Senator Boysko.
It seems to me that we should look at the way alcohol is regulated as far as home protection for children. There's similar challenges, I think, and I would imagine that we have a standard for protecting children from alcohol access, or there's something in the code somewhere. I'm not familiar with what it is, but I would suggest that we look to that as we make this regulation.
Thank you, Senator Boysko. So I did have 2 other elements in regards to home cultivation, and hoping that maybe we can get some guidance from folks. One of which is around growing in apartments or condos or other areas, and maybe folks from Normal or the administration have considered it, whether or not guidance would also include low odor, a variety of plants, or other guidance. Can someone online speak to sort of odor issues and places where we have multifamily dwellings and any concerns in that regard? Jen Michelle, maybe from Normal, can you help educate the committee? I've read a little bit of some of the documents and some of the concerns, but can you help inform about, are we creating a context in the future where we have condo association conflicts or apartment conflicts based on when a plant matures and is now flowering, and you've got the most odoriferous variety possible in said apartment or condo or other location?
yeah, certainly we see this across the country where rental properties prohibit indoor cultivation.
And I see Ms. Jacqueline Kidden, did you also want to speak to maybe the work group's discussions around this?
Yeah, so I would just echo kind of what Jen Michelle said. We have had conversations with other states, and it sounds as though rental companies and condo associations tend to put these prohibitions in place themselves, and that it doesn't appear to be a huge issue for those that own their own property.
So I guess as a follow-up consideration, and maybe Senator Serval has had this experience, these would require, for instance, bylaw changes by condos, and where you have requirements of change of bylaws require a certain threshold of votes. You know, I don't know, Senator Serval, if you've seen this condition, but you might have condo associations that can't achieve the required votes to change their bylaws, and therefore this might be too much in the weeds, so to speak.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Serval?
I know I had a bill that was in the Housing Commission this year, and I know one of the pieces of legislation they're considering, and I believe my recommendation on, had to do with giving associations, or confirming associations greater powers when it comes to residents smoking. And I think marijuana is probably caught up in that also, but there's been issues about smoke going between condos or into condos, and you know, people wanting to regulate that more. And so I know there's a bill out there this session, I think Delegate Keem is carrying it, that has to do with that aspect.
So I guess, do we need to have any, I don't want to complicate our lives, but it is, I think, germane to this committee versus judiciary or others, you know, provision that would allow, I mean, you can't override bylaws of a separate entity. Are you familiar with how they're addressing it, or would we need a vehicle within this language clarifying the sort of the authority of condos or others to do this? And I guess it's, apartment buildings could, because it's a rental, they could add any clauses they need to without change, but I guess my concern is around sort of the condo associations where you'd have hurdles with bylaws that usually require a supermajority in many cases to sort of achieve a change. That's sort of my...
Hey, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Serval.
You're wading into a really complicated legal area, morass. I mean, it's become really messy in the last couple of years because the Supreme Court of Virginia came down with a case a couple of years ago that really tightly read, or tightly, I guess, enforced property rights vis-a-vis bylaws and condos, and basically said that unless the docs like super explicitly authorize something, you can't do it. And there's this tension between those contractual rights and the code and exactly what we can do and what we can authorize as a legislature when the property owners have not empowered themselves to do it. And that there's a real thorny legal issue wrapped up in all that. And I'm not sure we want to go there right now. And that might be a discussion for another day. It also is something that the General Laws Committee tends to focus on more than rehab or even judiciary. So, I mean, I would be inclined just to leave that set of issues to them to be dealt with perhaps separately or maybe in connection with that whole smoking discussion they're having right now.
Senator, I want to second that motion, and we're going to move on.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Kagan.
Just one last comment before we do move on, but just listening to the discussion and understanding just kind of how complicated and comprehensive this whole plan is, I don't know if there's any appetite for removing that home cultivation piece and just setting up establishing the industry and saying we've already got this medicinal piece that we're arguing about competing with the recreational piece. So, you know, why do we have to do everything right now? We've all been kind of talking about slowing the roll, and I'm going to continue to talk about that. But, you know, taking out this home cultivation, we can always add it back in at another time. But I just think listening to, you know, people who know more about just the bylaws, all the things that we've recently been talking about with apartment complexes, condos, all these things, it's such a complicated process. Why are we just rushing through it? Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Higgins. Senator Eben.
I just wanted to just make one point to Senator Higgins, that even though we're legalizing and providing for sale, we may not end up having sale in all parts of the state, including rural areas, and being able to grow at home would allow people to have access to it without having to travel great distances, just a point of consideration.
Any other follow-up? Temperature of the Committee on Home Cultivation. Since we're wrapping up this section.
I didn't catch that, Mr.
Some
Chairman.
level of objection, but some in favor as well.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, personally, I think home cultivation is something that needs to happen. I mean, you can make your own beer, you can make your own wine. You can't sell it, obviously, but I have no problem with home cultivation. But I agree, there's some complexities wrapped up in it. I mean, you could probably spend a couple hours just talking about it all by itself, along with many of these other subtopics. And to me, it's not as big of a priority as compared with the overall bill. But I favor the policy. But if it's going to become a big distraction, then I wouldn't have a problem pushing it off to another day either. It's just, but that's kind of where I am on it.
All right, I see I know at least two thumbs down.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't catch what we were voting on. That's what I meant to ask you before you got started.
So is temperature of the committee on proceeding with home cultivation?
Chairman, I think that it should be part of the overall consideration.
Okay. And so I think the subcommittee is at roughly a 4-3 in favor of recommendation to proceed with home cultivation in the bill. Next item, we have roughly a half hour to get through two additional fairly significant items. Local referendum discussion, which we started yesterday, and then we're going to wrap up our discussions with the enactments sections of the clause are on my list. I'll also look over to council if there are other major issues that we have not addressed. Please feel free to flag those so you've got clear direction from this subcommittee in terms of recommendation to the full as we proceed. Senator Eben, on considerations, we had some discussion yesterday in regards to local opt-in, opt-out provisions, and wanted to turn the floor back over to you. I believe you had some potential edits in that regard as well.
Well, I mean, the bill provides for opt-in. I don't have, were some of the amendments that I gave you related to that?
So let me see. Through some of the amendments here. Through that, Senator Eben, and look for the specific line. I think the question before the committee, and it's a fairly substantial one, is whether or not you, much like the discussion yesterday with Senator Reeves, whether you start out with an established permissive retail understanding within this bill context right now, you'd be able to cultivate at home, you'd be able to grow within the county, you'd be able to theoretically manufacture and have medical. But the concept is, as written, the local board could pass an ordinance to prohibit the retail sale, even though all the other activities are going to occur. And I think there's been an expressed concern that the net effect is, number one, you'd have potentially social equity applicants in communities that would not be able to participate in markets. Number two, that framework would allow the illicit market to potentially continue to thrive in certain areas. And number three, you would have potential for towns located within counties to pass and have ordinance that would allow the retail. And so you have essentially densification pockets of retail where you have large surrounding areas with no access to retail. Now you have one small town within a region that does. And so you sort of begin to, I think, complicate some of the layers of both illicit market or access to small business for equity applicants and other issues, and wanted to make sure that the committee had an opportunity to take a look back through this. Thoughts from the members of the subcommittee? So this is lines roughly, I believe, 10,034 to 10,044, I believe. Let's see.
I thought we were at line 2878, section 4.1-608, local referendum.
Say the lines again, Senator Boysko.
2878.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, as we recall yesterday's testimony, as I remember hearing, most of the people who were testifying were asking for an opt-out as opposed to an opt-in. Are we going to ask for a consensus on where we are on that?
That's right. That's exactly right. There was, at least a dozen speakers yesterday that had a preference for an opt-out framework versus as written, which is they have to affirmatively opt in. And I certainly want to bring that point back up to this subcommittee so we can give direction to council. And I think, I hear a proposal from Senator Boysko to move forward with the opt-out framework. I see a thumbs up.
Mr. Chair, my comment, I'm supportive of the local referendum and allowing the localities that autonomy to decide. I would prefer an opt-in option. I think that's almost better if they can. It's up for debate, and I'd like to hear some other thoughts. But I prefer the opt-in option myself.
Okay, so you prefer the language as is? Okay, Senator Sturville. Opt-out. Reeves.
I'm undecided, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that's fair enough. And one undecided.
I'd like to hear from more local elections.
Okay. So that this council, the sense of the committee is to proceed with an opt-out provision versus as written, the opt-in.
Mr. Chair, so I would just ask a couple clarifying questions. So basically we'll be going through here, and everywhere we say allowed, we'll change to prohibited or prohibit. If we are going to get rid of the provision that requires you to opt in, so if you do nothing, to be clear, it will be allowed. Do we want to retain the provision in subsection A of 608 that allows a locality by ordinance to, which would be in the first version, it says to approve the operation of retail stores. If we're going to switch it to opt out, do we want to retain that provision, which would allow a locality by ordinance to opt out of participating in the market? Or do we just want to have it limited to a referendum held by, or signed and started by at least 10% of the voters in the locality?
Yeah, so I guess a follow-up question to you, Council, is with the same framework we worked with Senator Reeves on the ABC law, how did we address that issue?
Mr. Chair, Senator Reeves' measure solely relies on the local referendum. So the locality cannot come in and make a decision itself. It's up to the people to petition and make that decision themselves. And it was similarly an opt-out provision.
Okay. Yeah, I think probably staying with that similar framework where it's by referendum opt-out would be the appropriate. So that would mirror the ABC language, correct?
Mr. Chair, that'd be correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just a question
Senator Boysko?
for clarification. In the provision here, it does have rules saying where you can have, so not near a school, they need to be spaced out, so we're not going to set up something that's going to end up with, a strip of unregulated by having it. the opt-out provision, correct?
Yes, Senator Boyska, I guess I would defer to council, but there's the different section that still enables localities to pass ordinances in terms of where the retail establishments can occur and other ordinances in regards to those. So that this section would not affect the other sections of the bill in terms of the local government authority.
Okay, just want to make sure that they have the local authority to do what they feel is right in their communities.
Any further discussion on the local opt-in, opt-out discussion? Okay. The last item on the committee's agenda is the enactment schedule as part of the bill. And I'm going to ask Senator Eben, and likely with the assistance of Deputy Secretary Copenhaver, to also maybe lead us through the enactments. Senator Eben.
Had some changes in dates, but if the Deputy Secretary wants to walk through them, that would be fine with me, the enactments in general, in terms of the chronology.
Deputy Secretary Copenhaver.
I'm happy to, Senator Eben and Mr. Chairman. So the way that this is currently drafted, these enactments will likely have to change when you all do a redraft, creating a new agency. But the idea is that the regulatory process, standing up the marijuana regulator, would begin immediately on July 1st, 2021. That way the process gets started. Then that also means that all the boards would begin on January 1st, 2021. Also, the automatic expungements would begin on July 1st, 2021. Then the way these enactment clauses are currently written, I point your attention to line 9952, enactment clause 5. This is directing ABC, wouldn't be a new authority, but to promulgate regulations to implement provisions of this act by July 1st, 2022. So that's a year after enactment. But again, that will likely need to change based on the fact that we would be standing up a new state agency. In addition, on enactment clause number 6, the regulator may start accepting applications for licenses at that same time, right after the regulations are finalized. And then for the first 6 months, the way this is written would give a preference to qualified social equity applicants as determined by those regulations that they have established. Then 6 months after the finalization of the regulations, once the licenses are out the door, that first crop is grown and products are manufactured, then the retail sales would start on January 1st, 2023. The other enactment clauses go into the boards, and I know we have some technical amendments that we've worked on with council to make sure that we have all those dates right. Enactment clause number 10, I would just point to, this is something that VDACs would be responsible for. There are two things primarily in here. The first is promulgating regulations around the pesticide use for marijuana cultivation. And the second is promulgation of regulations around the food safety requirement for marijuana, retail marijuana products, which would mirror everything else that we have for food safety, but we had to kind of pull that out and make that a separate section of the bill. Number 11 is that all of the secretaries who are involved in this would convene a work group to develop criteria for collecting the data before the market opens. I would ask my colleague, Deputy Assistant Secretary Finley, to talk about that if he would like to go into that in a little bit more detail. I would also ask her if she could walk us through the other enactments that are talking about the education requirements and other public health issues as well. I think that's through enactment clause number 14. Enactment clause number 15 has to do with the local options. Enactment clause number 16 and 15 would need to change with the change from an opt-in to opt-out, if that's the direction you all go. Number 16 is where we bring in the existing pharmaceutical processor program under a new marijuana regulator. This bill leaves that program untouched in terms of the legal authority, but ABC had worked with Department of Health Professions to establish a timeline through which both agencies felt like it was appropriate to transfer that regulatory authority over to the new agency. And I'm sure that with the new regulatory body, we could do that effectively as well. And then the 17th enactment clause, I would lean on my colleague, Assistant Secretary Katoon, for that, but I think that is a standard boilerplate language when dealing with certain criminal code sections.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy
Katie,
Secretary. Did Deputy Secretary Katoon want to also chime in, or anybody else from the team?
This is Katie Finley, Assistant Secretary for Health and Human Resources. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to walk through quickly the enactment clauses on data collection and education in schools. So enactment clause 11, a work group would convene immediately and then report back to the governor and the committee by November of 2021 on any cost or efforts that would be needed to update the education curriculum in schools. Virginia already has a really strong mental health, behavioral health curriculum in schools, but update it to make sure that it includes marijuana specific information. And sorry, I just jumped ahead to 12. So 11 is the data collection and what it would take to get that strong baseline data. That should be reported by November 2021. And then enactment clauses 12 through 14 deal with that education update that I just described, also with a report out date by November 2021.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I was just going to expand a little bit on what Brad had mentioned. So on January 1, 2023 is when certain penalties will be removed. So things like simple possession for those over the age of 21 and older. It's also when certain new penalties will come into play, what we discussed with home growing today, things like selling unlicensed marijuana. So that will just be the day that the new changes come into effect.
Mr. Chairman.
Can you repeat that date, ma'am?
Yes, that's going to be January 1, 2023.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sproul.
Based on that, the question then, has anyone, I'm looking through, I haven't seen where we have really involved in law enforcement. Now I'm speaking because I know when it comes to drugs, the law enforcement is real hard on minority community. That's what y'all say. I call it black community. I don't use that with minority. So I know it's real hard. I want to know, I don't see where we have a law enforcement on any committee or when they're involved in this process at all. Because I can see right now, when it comes to black folks, police are going to go crazy. So I want to make sure that anywhere, why can't we put something in here when they could be involved in the process, whether they are on the board or on the subcommittee or something, so they can also inform the law enforcement around the whole state. Because right now I can see this is an open door for the policemen to start arresting black folks.
Mr. Chair, speaking to that.
Yes, please.
Yeah, Senator Sproul, just to address your question and concern, we did have law enforcement and state police involved in some of our committee meetings when we were talking about this at the executive work group. And this is certainly something that would be communicated with our law enforcement across the state as these new policies go into effect. I would also note that expungements are set to begin July 1st of this year of 2021. And there is also a portion of the bill, which I think we'll probably get to a little bit more when we are in judiciary, but there is a portion of the bill dealing with resentencing for individuals who are currently in prison for marijuana-related crimes.
Follow-up questions from the Committee on Enactment Clauses?
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Eben?
I would just note that the dates from the ones in the bill will have to change as the new agency is established, but the expungement can start on July 1st of this year, as the Deputy Secretary emphasized.
Thank you, Senator Eben. So you're suggesting roughly the one-year time change to 2024 is the appropriate time, or what?
Actually, I'd like to ask Deputy Secretary Copenhaver for an independent agency to stand up, if it would be a year or 6 months or more than a year, that he would recommend.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That unfortunately that gets beyond my level of expertise. I think Mr. Gribben from JLART may have a better understanding of how that would work.
Mr. Gribben,
Chairman, with your permission.
The Deputy Secretary has thrown it over to you. You are now under the bus. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In our report, we estimated our timelines were slightly longer than what we had estimated. If this went to ABC, it'd take about 6 months longer than the work group estimated. And then we added another 6 months onto that if you're creating a new agency. So our thought is that if the idea is to give it to a new agency, you'd want to look at extending that deadline by at least 6 months and possibly up to a year.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gribben. I guess I did have one follow-up question for Brad, which is the social equity component. One of my concerns in the timing based on the enactments is when the Equity Reinvestment Board as well as social equity programs would be able to ramp up enough time, and maybe this extension of 6 months or a year actually gives us a little bit more time to ramp up the social equity piece to ensure that we're actually doing outreach and assisting those candidates that may be interested in applying for actually forming a business plan, getting in financing before the application deadline. And under the original plan, sort of, applications and issuing sort of happened that July 1 of 2022 in terms of starting. Now, hopefully, it's my hope that you just don't have a narrow, as I would read it, you'd barely have enough time to get sort of the reinvestment board up online with elements and equity programs in place before the applications process opened up. And so it's my hope that maybe some language or reworking of the enactments can be clear to the General Assembly when we plan to have these actual social equity programs in place to do outreach, so it actually better aligns in preparation for an application period to open versus waiting for the application period to open and then trying to reach out to social equity candidates. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chairman, it does make sense. I think we can definitely look at some language to clarify that. I'll just say that the idea is that, and originally when we had talked about this going to ABC, that ABC was standing up this program. They were hiring the social equity business support team, which is specifically in the bill, and that those folks would immediately start helping the applicants kind of go through that process. In addition, the loan fund that we're creating, we would like for that to also start immediately, and we have some budget items that would capitalize that and help that to begin immediately. The cannabis equity, the cannabis equity fund could then reinvest additional monies into the loan fund if necessary down the road. But I think you're absolutely right. We want to make sure that we have that timing right to ensure that we are reaching the people that we intend to reach with the social equity programs. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe there's a couple items we can look at, some of the enactments, to ensure that, as this goes through the committee, that we're comfortable of the timelines. It sounds like it happened immediately, but maybe there's some sort of hard deadlines that things and programs should be placed in. Outreach shall occur by sort of date certain. So we, as the General Assembly, as we move forward with this and we invest in this framework as well as money, we know when we should expect to hear things from, maybe our constituents or other small businesses that are trying to assess it, and we know there's a place for them to reach out to. That's what I think we want to make sure, that we know where the resource is, we know the date that it's going to be available, and how to connect our constituents to that resource.
Mr. Chair. Ms. Jen.
Senator Giggins.
Mr. Chair, just since you're talking about public outreach and education about the social equity pieces and loans available and whatnot, I know yesterday there was some discussion about the drugged driving and just the health and public education about starting that sooner and using and allocating some of the funding to start 6 months or more out so that we have a good base in place before we just release the whole thing to the public. So just wanted some discussion about that. And I think that Patrick Cushing is available as well if we have any questions.
Thank you. Senator Eben?
Great minds think alike. I was just making a note, Senator Kiggins, that we could consider perhaps an enactment clause directing the Secretary of Transportation to begin planning for an impaired driving campaign to begin prior to legalization as an enactment clause. I don't know if that would fit standard enactment clause. Can we do that? So I would consider perhaps a member of the...
Yeah, maybe I can reach out to again, Deputy Secretary Copenhaver, whether it be more appropriate for some of the work groups and that have been formed between public safety and the different secretariats to sort of have a joint public health awareness and public safety campaign, because I think there's two components.
Yes, there absolutely, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, there's absolutely two components, not just the driving safety, but also the health awareness, and there needs to be a very intense educational campaign that's set up at least 6 months prior.
Mr. Chair?
Hold on. I'm gonna go to Deputy Secretary Copenhaver and then back to Senator Boysko.
So after our discussion yesterday, our group had a lot of thought and other discussion about this, and I know Assistant Secretary Finley was leading those discussions, and they had some resolution there.
All right, Deputy Secretary Finley.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Kiggins, for the question. This did come up a lot in our work group, the importance of these prevention education efforts. As you all know, the governor's budget did initially have a line of credit to pay for ABC to pay for all costs of standing up the new industry. And as you all are also probably aware, they do have some substance abuse prevention components in ABC. Since the committee appears to be shifting to a new agency instead of ABC, I think we stand ready to work with you all on kind of what this looks like. Another thing we really heard in the work group is that Virginia has a strong foundation for these prevention efforts, and really depending on what you want it to look like or what you want it to focus on, there's a lot of good work being done at both state agencies and local entities, some of which is very much focused on substance use disorder prevention more generally, which a lot of the science shows that you need to have that general, look at the risk factors that are underlying it. And we have a lot of that good work going on in Virginia. In terms of the marijuana specific, again, we had initially had that credit line go into ABC, but definitely happy to continue to provide technical assistance on kind of what these prevention campaigns would look like at different state agencies and local entities.
Thank you very much. Senator Boysko?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add in that the Substance Abuse Council should be a part of that. It's a conglomeration of service providers, and would like to make sure that that's part of that education piece.
Thank you, Senator Boysko. So it sounds like maybe we could do some follow-up with the administration and collaboration of the work group's thinking, and including some of the various Substance Abuse Council and others are part of the effort, Senator Kiggins, and maybe we could get an enactment or some identified sort of timeline, again, where the General Assembly could expect that the public awareness, health, and safety campaign would begin to ensure that the public is well aware. And I think some of Mr. Cushing with AAA's comments yesterday, the committee heard those, and I think taking up some of those recommendations would be helpful to the overall public safety effort, ensuring that there's funding also in place to do that would be supported. And so I'd ask David May, our counsel, to also add that in concept, that whether it be the initial work group as well as a date set, that those campaigns should be in place well in advance and prior to the overall 2023 or 2024 date of implementation, so the public awareness is very much in place. Any further comments, Senator Kiggins, on that?
Thank you. I think that addressed, I don't know if yesterday we heard from Patrick Cushing from the AAA. I don't know if he had any insight or if you want to hear again on any specifics.
Sure. I'll open up really quickly to Mr. Cushing for a follow-up from AAA. Go ahead.
All right, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. Patrick Cushing on behalf of AAA. I don't want to belabor this. AAA is opposed to legalization, but the direction, Mr. Chairman, that you and Senator Kiggins are heading, I think is a good one. And I would love to connect with the folks in the administration working on this to work on the language. The key element is making sure that we are educating on drug driving well in advance of when public has access to legal marijuana. So that's our key point. If people are going to die because marijuana is legalized, there's a strong chance that that's going to happen on a roadway. So that's our issue, and we appreciate the committee's attention.
Thank you, Mr. Cushing. Other questions from subcommittee members on enactment clauses, public safety? Senator Reeves, Senator McDougal, Kiggins, Serville. Council.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I've got a couple questions just as far as nailing down some details here. We talked about general timeline or that we were going to have to make adjustments. I think J-Lark was talking about 6 months, maybe delay. I think that's pretty ambitious going from a situation where we have an entity that's already got regulations on the books, that already has a board of directors, that already has employees, has a building. To me, that's not a 6-month difference in establishing those components. I don't even know if it's a 12-month difference. But I'm just trying to figure out, and I don't know that we need to necessarily dictate when exactly this new agency is established, so much as we do have some provisions in this bill requiring when ABC was going to have their regulations ready. So maybe we kind of stay with that central focus and say, whenever you set up, have your regulations on the books by this date, start issuing licenses by this date, and retail sales begin on this date. So I think those are probably the 3 main points that we just need to address starting off, just to give me something to get in there. Otherwise, I'll be taking a shot in the dark.
So thoughts from the committee or administration? I know we heard 6 months. I tend to agree. I think that's a very aggressive timeline. I think from the subcommittee's discussions over the last day, plus hearing from other members, my sense is that we want to get it right versus get it in place faster. And so, take a suggestion from the subcommittee, whether we adjust those by a year. Senator Reeves.
I would suggest at a minimum a year, but I think you could do quarterly updates for progress, and you could write the bill. I think David could write the bill as to if they are ahead in that process, the ability to speed that timeline up. Somehow you can wordsmith this to where there's an ability, if they are ahead of progress, we can bring it back and look at it before the General Assembly, or how we enactment kind of put that into place, depending on who they hire to be to run that shop and get it rolling and those sort of things. So, that'd be my suggestion. I'd start at a year, but certainly businesses can ramp up pretty quickly depending on where they get their resources and some of the things like that. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Evan.
I would just thank Senator Reeves and agree with him to move it up so that the sales begin, even if we put that the sales began to the public on January 1st, 2024, we would have 2 General Assembly sessions that if for some reason they're ahead of schedule, we can consider advancing, and if they're behind schedule, we consider delaying.
So the suggestion from the subcommittee is at this point to add a year. It can always come back and be readjusted should there be advancements or other information. And I think for the purpose, there may be further discussions based on, from this subcommittee and other committees as it moves on, to get more clarity from the administration's work group or others that they may feel to more narrowly define the timeframes. But the recommendation from the subcommittee is to adjust the dates by 1 year from what was proposed in the enactment schedule.
And I would suggest mandatory quarterly updates to the chairman or whoever's going to help regulate that body.
With report progress. Other comments from the subcommittee?
Mr. Chair, one more clarification. We had talked about putting a hard date in there as far as when they're going to have this social equity plan in place.
Yes.
Did you have an idea for when that should be relative to that January 1, 2024 date?
I think it's in relation to when the licenses would be available, Mr. Chairman, and I think we'd want that at least, based on the time frame, 8 months in advance or, a year in advance based on the time. It sounds like we have got a little bit more time to ramp that up sufficiently enough. Deputy Secretary Copenhaver, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that in terms of when we could put in terms of providing some direction to our council here in terms of where we could put in the social equity ramp-up date within the enactments.
Mr. Chairman, I think that council is right. I think we need to consider, and you're right, Mr. Chairman, when the licenses would start going out. So my assumption is that if you were going to start sales on January 1st, 2024, licenses would at the latest need to start going out July 1st, 2023. So I would think that you would want to have the social equity components in order to ramp up and reach out to those communities a year before that, July 1st, 2022. If I'm doing backwards math right.
Yeah, that appears to be right. So yeah, I think for direction for council, if we can also set that to at least a year in advance, that way there's sufficient enough time for outreach, education, whatever we need to do to make sure that we have, and frankly, better results in some of the other states that haven't had as, I think, successful, and hopefully we can get the right framework in place to do it. Other clarifying items from council that are needed from the subcommittee?
I'm certain of it, Mr. Chairman. I may have more than we have time to go over at this point. Some of the stuff that I'm going to be doing in this amendment in the nature of a substitute as well is just going to be doing some cleanup. So there's going to be some other changes that I make that we haven't discussed, but they're not substantive, just things that are in here because of the very nature of the bill being so large. For the fee for getting multiple licenses, which I think is on line 3160. Let me get there quickly. I've got to look back. Did we, my first question would be 3160, did we decide to amend that amount, or was that not formally taken up?
So this was the amending of the multiple licensed or sort of vertical framework from $250 to $1 million, correct? Yes, I'll be happy to pull the sense of the subcommittee to clarify, but the idea is to get additional capital to the table. And obviously there's a larger competitive advantage with vertical integration, and this is a funding source for that social equity capital. All right, hearing no opposition, the subcommittee recommends.
And Mr. Chair, the other thing I wanted to point out here is, so what we're looking at is in B, we're saying that you can have a combination of licenses, meaning you could have a cultivation license and a manufacturing, or manufacturing and retail and wholesale, whatever. You can participate in more than one tier. It's basically what B is really getting at. But when you look at the language in D, it starts off by saying, any person who wishes to possess more than one license pursuant to B. It's not specific as far as, is it referring to licensees who have a license in more than one tier, or is it referring also to someone who maybe just has two retail shops? It looked like the intent was to say if you're participating in more than one tier, and vertical integration, that you're going to be subject to this $1 million fine. But I just want to clarify that, because right now it says that if you have more than one license period, so if you have two retail shops, you're going to be subject to $1 million fine, arguably.
So the change would be to essentially, identify the class between, different tiers to ensure that it's tiered. So maybe I could, Senator Eben, you want the administration and the governor's work group to be able to speak to that, if that was the intent? Yeah. All right, Mr. Deputy Secretary, you're up.
Mr. Chairman, I think, and someone will have to correct me on from our team if I'm wrong, but I think Mr. May is correct. The intent was more for vertical integration, not for just holding multiple licenses. But we also the idea is that we want to prevent a monopolization or discourage monopolization in this industry, and so I could see some value there too. But I think Mr. May is correct in the intent as we wrote it, and maybe we can make that more clear.
Thank you very much. So direction from the subcommittee is, I think, from the discussions yesterday and today, is that there would be the additional fee, but to make it clear, it's between tiers per se.
I'll take care of that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
The other thing I would highlight, and this, I think this is probably one of the issues that hopefully will get addressed in judiciary, but probably deserves some attention at some point, would be a conversation about the word intoxicated. I think a lot of the prohibited practices here prohibit, for example, a licensee from selling alcohol to someone who's intoxicated. It's defined in some areas, and basically it's just limited to, if you're under the influence of alcohol, under our rules, you can't sell someone alcohol. We have similar provisions in this bill to say that if the person's visibly under the influence of alcohol, you can't sell the marijuana. But we did not expand the intoxicated provisions to include someone who's under the influence of marijuana. So the substantive question would be, do we want those provisions to apply to someone who is under the influence of marijuana? Should that prohibit you from buying alcohol? Should it prohibit you from buying more marijuana? Or do we want to leave it as you're intoxicated?
Mr. Chairman?
Under the influence of alcohol.
Just a moment, Senator Sproul. I agree. I'm going to defer that to Judiciary Committee for cleanup items. Certainly if there's suggestions, but I'm going to kick this one over to Judiciary. And so since we have Senator McDougal and Senator Serval also serving on Judiciary, I know they are quickly taking notes of items that they will be taking up in the next week or two.
Senator Briscoe is
Sproul?
also on the Judiciary.
Sorry, and Senator Briscoe. Senator Sproul.
Mr. Mays, tell me if you can, once this stuff is passed and you drive in your car and you can have some marijuana, smoke or what have you, and not get stopped, how can you say I am under the influence of marijuana when I know you can smell it in the car, and I have what the kids call a joint, whatever that is, a joint. So now I did have one joint. I don't know what that means, and then they stopped me and said, you can smell it. So, and it's okay, if it's legal, I can do that. How can you say I'm under the influence of marijuana?
Mr. Chair, Senator Sproul. Yeah, I think you get on a little bit of a slope there. I think that's also going to be an issue that's analyzed a lot in Judiciary. But there's conflicting opinions, basically. The CDC has something to it. They focus a lot on training officers, training staff of businesses to look for certain impairment tests that can determine whether you're under the influence of marijuana. There's also reportedly some devices that can measure how long it's been since you've smoked marijuana. Not necessarily how much is in your system, but maybe how long it's been since you consumed it. I don't know that those tests work if you are consuming edibles. So, yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, you're going to have people with some training to visibly look at someone's impairment and do some testing to determine whether the influence.
Well, my question to you, Mr. Chairman, my question is now that they have training now on the laws that are already on the books, and a lot of them don't do it. Some of them do now, not everybody. I want to be clear. Not all officers now. So, but they are trained now for what stuff on the books now, they don't do it. So I'm just saying, if it's legal that I can smoke them, whatever you want to call it, in this street, and I don't go over the limit, whatever it says, a bag or whatever you want to call it, I don't go over the limit, and I've been stopped, you can come to the car, you go smell it, and the law say I can have that amount, whatever that is, and you can smell it. Now, so the officer comes to me and says, "Officer, how you doing today?" "Yes, sir, I got marijuana. The law says I can smoke that amount," and that's what I have done. So the kid this now, so I want to know how he's gonna have something to determine that, because it's not drinking. You can blow into someone drinking, but he got to have something without his word of mouth, because I don't trust his word of mouth for saying, "Well, your eyes was shaky. You didn't take 4 steps right." So I want to know, when it comes to that, what are the laws going to be pertaining to someone who has had too much in a car, without the officer using his own discretion on what he determines it is going to be. Because when it comes to black folk, they're going to say it every time. That's my personal opinion.
Mr. Chairman? Well, to address Senator Spruill, while there may in fact be a racial disparity, there is money. I put in a budget amendment to train the Department of State Police to train local law enforcement officers as drug recognition experts in order to provide effective detection and enforcement of driving under the influence of drugs, including marijuana. And this is a certification that exists now, and we currently do prosecute people for that, but it's not a blood test.
All right, thank you. Good discussion. Look forward to that discussion in judiciary as the bill moves forward. Council, any other follow-up clarifying items you need from the subcommittee before we adjourn?
Mr. Chair, I think that gives me enough to get where I need to be. I'll follow up, though, if I come across anything between now and Friday.
Yes, in a second. Any other follow-up questions or items for the subcommittee? Okay, any other follow-up from subcommittee members before we take a vote to recommend the bill to the full committee as in concept amended? All right. Clerk, can you call the roll?
Senator McDougall.
The motion is to recommend the bill to the full committee.
To be reported out
To be
as
reported.
amended in concept.
Right.
Chairman, I'm in favor of a number of the changes, but I'm not in favor of the bill, so that would be a no.
Okay.
Mr. May.
Mr. Chair, just to intervene quickly, I think the motion would be to report with amendments, incorporate Senate Bill 1243, which was Morrissey's bill that we decided to roll in, we already voted on, and then refer to judiciary.
Thank you.
So moved.
There's a motion by Serval, there's a second by Senator Boysko.
Senator McDougall.
Mr. Chairman, I'm in favor of the rolling in. I'm not in favor of reporting. So I guess no.
Senator Reeves. Senator Serval.
Aye.
Senator Spruill.
Aye.
Senator Boysko.
Aye.
Senator Kiggins.
Same sentiment, in favor of some changes, but no to the bill.
Pike.
Aye.
Ayes 4, noes 3.
Thank you. The bill as rolled into and amended in concept and recommended to re-refer to judiciary is recommended 4-3 by the subcommittee. I want to take an opportunity to thank all the panelists that have joined us over the last 2 days. the 6 hours worth of time spent on both public testimony, both our clerk staff and team and subcommittee members. I know there are still multiple committees that this bill will go through and still likely multiple changes, but I think we in the subcommittee have addressed a lot of the major primary policy considerations to be addressed by this bill and legislation. I appreciate the administration's team as well as all the advocates that have joined us in the discussion. I know it's been informative for me and the subcommittee. And thanks Senators Luis Lucas and Senator Eben and Morrissey for working with us through this. And the committee is now adjourned. The committee will rise.